Black Brit. Chapter 1. In the drawing room, a hush prevailed, broken only by the soft crackle of the hearth, its warm flames dancing in the grate. Catherine sat upright on the chaise, her gloved hands folded in her lap. Across from her, Edward leaned against the mantel. Her brother always seemed to hold a certain countenance, wearing the mask of polite indifference as his mind mused the ponderings of a wealthy son. All the while, Catherine, unwavering in her efforts, delineated her plan with resolve. "Brother," she began, "I must go. You cannot reasonably expect me to remain in Kent whilst you embark on your grand adventures across the colonies. I don't believe father would object to my decision." Edward, the only son of the Viscount, was to be addressed as the Honourable Edward Ashbourne by all others. Their family's estate, grand as those of the nobility, placed them well within the landed gentry. His brow rose with an air of regal quiet command as he fixed his gaze upon her. "And what purpose, dear sister, could your presence possibly serve in such endeavours? Trade agreements are hardly the province of a woman in your position. Yes, I could hardly expect you to be interested in the matters of tobacco and cotton. And yet I am. I insist. Lydia must accompany me as well. You are well aware of her indispensable nature to me." His lips curled as he looked away for a moment. Father would most certainly object to such an idea. It is not at all a place for the faint of heart. I'd much prefer the adventure of a land afar to the mundanity of Kent and all those who reside. I have always desired to venture to America. Lady Wardell has told me so much about it. Yes, I see that both she and her husband share the same proclivity for conversation," he remarked, plopping onto the sofa. "So it is settled then? I shall be no bother. My dear Catherine, it is a journey of business, not of leisure, and I will have very little time to escort you. I shall not need an escort, for I intend to take Lydia, if she is willing," she said confidently. He turned to her, squinting his eyes. Lydia's family had worked for theirs since first arriving in Britain. Originally a slave, her mother secured her freedom on the grounds that Lydia remained an apprentice. Having less than 5 years left to serve, she dreamed of travel, but Catherine had hoped she'd reconsider the length of her stay. I hardly am convinced that she would be interested in America or any of the British colonies, be they former or not, due to the current state regarding views toward the Negro. Catherine looked down and away as Edward inclined slightly. "Surely you've told her?" he asked, to which she said nothing. "Surely she must know," he continued. Finally she looked to him, declaring, "The business of America is no concern to her. Why would it be?" Edward exhaled. "I doubt that she would prefer to see the slaves in such a state, albeit necessary. I will be staying on the plantation, of a Mr. Francis Monroe, a friend of father's, and I am told that he owns a great many. Dearest Edward, perhaps she will make acquaintances. What desire would a woman of her stature want with anyone not British, much less an American Negro? She is far too respectable for that." A soft smile flickered, unbidden, as he recalled her laugh, and he straightened his posture, as if the mere mention of her required a greater composure than he could quite manage. His sibling, noticing, vaguely attempted to hide her own. He had loved Lydia since they were children, he 3 years her senior, and remembered when they would go out and play, completely unaware of the circumstances of their birth, his by rank and hers, only race. After successfully gaining Edward's approval to her involvement in the expedition, Lydia seated herself opposite in the morning room. "You called, Miss Catherine?" she inquired, her voice measured. She inclined gracefully into a curtsy, her hands drawn lightly behind her. Catherine smiled, unwilling to postpone the news any longer. "My dear sweet Lydia, how do you feel about embarking on an adventure?" Chapter 2. It was May in the bustling port of Norfolk, Virginia. A scene of utter chaos unfolded, stevedores shouting aloud, crates creaking as they were hoisted onto the docks, and the pungent scent of brine and tobacco hanging heavy in the air. The ship, its ropes groaning in protest, eased alongside the pier as sailors secured it with practiced efficiency. Lydia, slightly overwhelmed, descended the gangplank and steadied herself against the unfamiliar ground. The air, stifling compared to England's temperate breeze, caused sweat to bead on her neck. Ahead of her, Catherine, led by Edward, dismounted from the vessel. "Not quite London, is it?" Edward remarked, his gaze sweeping over the bustling activity around them. "I hadn't prepared for the weather to be this warm," Catherine stated. "I wonder how it shall fare when we depart in early August on the 4th, Edward commented. Lydia's eyes roamed the scene. Blacks, many in chains, unloading goods as if their lives depended. A stern overseer barked orders, his voice cutting through the maze of profitability. Young women, many matching her own complexion, wasted away carrying large baskets back and forth. Barbaric, she reasoned, scarcely able to believe the product of her eyes. Of course, due to her own family, she had known slavery to exist but had never seen it in these conditions. Such an explanation aligns well with her circumstance, as she had never even left Kent. Caroline looked back, noticing Lydia's demeanour and the objects of her attention. Stopping, she turned and waited, while Edward walked on. Once Lydia had arrived, she took her arm in hers and smiled, before continuing to reach their destination. "The weather truly is much better here, don't you agree?" Catherine asked. Lydia politely nodded, affording a smile despite the true state of her emotions. As they departed the port, the carriage bumped along the dusty road, flanked by sprawling fields of tobacco and cotton, so large as to challenge the thought of possibility. An hour later, the Monroe Plantation loomed ahead, its grandeur put off by the clusters of wooden cabins scattered in the distance. Francis Monroe, the owner of the dwelling, greeted Edward at the steps. "Mr. Ashbourne, your father show do speak highly of you." Lydia remained at the base of the steps, looking back toward the carriage, already wishing her journey reversed, unable to hear the words of her mistress, commenting on the girth of an oak tree nearby. "And of your hospitality, Mr. Monroe," Edward replied. One of the leading houseworkers, a tall, slender woman with skin as dark as coal stones, led Lydia throughout the premises, while Edward and Catherine were escorted by Mr. Monroe. "That's the kitchen," Betsy said, pointing to a low brick building. "Massa Francis say you free." Lydia nodded. "I am on an apprenticeship set to leave in only a number of years."
"You're on a what?"
Lydia, releasing a frustrated breath, replied, "Yes, I'm free."
"Well, then why are you dressed like that if you're free?"
"I thought they made you wear it as a punishment." Lydia looked down at the pristine dress, her favourite, that Catherine had purchased for her as a gift only a month before. "I happen to find it quite well chosen," she replied. "Where are you from?" Betsy asked. "England."
"Where is that at?"
Lydia stared at her for a moment, her eyes unforgiving. "South of Scotland, west of Ireland. Are you familiar with it?"
"No, I never even heard of it."
"Never even heard? That's absurd. Do all Americans not know of their motherland?" Betsy shrugged her shoulders. "Are you from the motherland too?" she asked. Lydia looked to the side towards the bluebells growing in the grass. With great hesitance she replied, "That is where I was born, yes." "All black people free over there?" "Free? Well, to my knowledge, yes, in a sense. Certainly not anything resembling what I've witnessed here." They continued to walk down the dirt path, with Lydia holding up her dress, with each step protecting it from the dust. Lydia paused as another slave passed by on a carriage. The man caught her eye as she turned, unable to look away. His shirt was damp with sweat, and he did look long exhausted of the day. She wondered how he could work up a smile in such miserable conditions. Yet, as he passed, the man tipped his hat and nodded, revealing the increasing diameter of his dimples, which Lydia did secretly appreciate. "Who is that?" she asked, after he rode by them. Betsy, who was looking on, seemingly amused by the strange woman's infatuation, smiled. "That's Nathan. He's the blacksmith, but he be doing driving for massa too. He gon be the one taking you to the stow tomorrow. Don't say too much, though. But he sure is good to look at." Lydia drew back at her frankness, placing a hand on her bosom. "My word, I wouldn't be concerned with looking at him to any degree in the slightest," she said. "And pardon me, but who did you say that he was driving for?" "Massa Monroe."
You know the white man that was talking to the people you came with?
"Master?" Lydia asked, to which Betsy nodded. Lydia scoffed, saying,
Mr. Ashbourne doesn't even go by master.
"And he is a great deal more prestigious than your provider, I imagine." Betsy shrugged. Chapter 3. The following midday, Edward sat upright in the carriage, his gloved hand resting lightly on the door as he surveyed the scene unfolding before him. Beside him, Catherine sat looking out toward the nature brushing against the moving contraption, and across from them was Lydia, who tried desperately to keep herself upright through the bumps. "Did you sleep well, Miss Lydia?" Edward asked, while his sister continued struggling against the rising heat. She looked up to him, rendering a smile which successfully alone raised his spirits. "Why, yes, Mr. Edward. Once Betsy had assisted me with the mattress's manufacture, I had never known straw to feel so agreeable." Catherine raised her head with such suddenness Lydia was sure it would fall off. "Straw?" she asked, before looking toward Edward. "Surely you cannot expect her to endure such an arrangement. It is entirely unfit for any respectable individual." He released a sigh before saying, "I have already endeavoured to persuade Mr. Monroe to permit her the use of a guest room, but he remains resolute in his refusal. Quite unfortunate." "Yes, quite unfortunate," Catherine agreed. "The beggars of London have better sleeping quarters. Surely there is somewhere else we can stay," she pleaded. "None that would afford her any better living conditions, I fear." "Mr. Edward and Miss Catherine, I assure you that I am completely content, and your display of concern is unwarranted. Really it is." They looked at her with concerned faces. She saw no use in sharing the truth, as to not upset them, making them regret bringing her there. For if she told them, they surely would have been uncomfortable for the remainder of the visit. The sincerity of the matter being, she scarcely had slept the rope bed, offering little in the way of comfort. The sole consolation of the circumstance, if there was any to be had, was that Betsy, who she originally thought utterly primitive and rough, was at least entertaining. Nathan at the helm guided the steed toward the town. When the carriage halted, Edward alighted first, offering his hand to assist both women.
"Heavens, Edward!"
exclaimed Catherine, as she descended gracefully from the carriage, her bonnet slightly askew from the journey, as Lydia followed close behind. "This heat is quite aggressive. I fear I shall not last the day." "Then let us make this excursion brief that we may proceed to the theatre," Edward said. "You have been eager to see the town, and thus here we are." Nathan secured the horses in a nearby spot, awaiting the stranger's return. They walked along the dusty streets, pausing in front of a small mercantile shop, its windows displaying an assortment of fine goods sparkling in the reflection of the sun. Edward opened the door, and a soft bell tinkled as they entered. Inside, the scent of leather and tobacco mingled with the faint, sweet aroma of lavender. Catherine excitedly gravitated toward a rack of cotton and linen fabrics, her fingers brushing the delicate material with an air of curiosity. Lydia lingered near the shelves, her eyes scanning each item, while Edward approached a display of cigars not yet available in England. May I assist you, sir? The shopkeeper asked, stepping forward. Not at the moment, but my sister may need assistance
When she discovers what she is to buy, if ever.
he joked, never removing his gaze from the tobacco. The shopkeeper noticed Lydia, his eyes drifting toward and finally on her. His expression stiffened, the hard creases in his face turning sharply downward. "Hey, girl," he called with such anger causing Edward to look up and Catherine to come to the front. "Who you in here for?" Lydia's eyes rose, her countenance betraying a deep shock at the man's tone. She was taken aback to find him gazing directly at her. Her voice failed, for she had never been addressed in such a manner in the duration of her life. After receiving no response, he retired from his original position and walked toward Lydia, who began to lift her hands and step back in defense. "You can't talk?" he queried as he advanced, his pace unbroken. "I beg your pardon," Edward inquired, rising, before turning and positioning himself between them. The shopkeeper came to a halt, his posture straightening. "She with you?" he asked, pointing his straight finger toward Lydia's face.
That she is, sir.
"What is it of any concern to you?" Edward took another step toward the man, angling his brow, unwilling to hide his discontent. "It's my concern 'cause you in my store. Where are you all from anyway?"
Kent, in England.
"I implore, what is your problem with the young woman who accompanies us? She can't be walking round the store by herself. She need to— I will accompany her," Catherine said, taking Lydia's by the arm. The man looked to Catherine and then to Lydia before returning back to Edward. "No, you can stay, but only after you get that Negro the hell out of my store." Although he did not say Negro, but another far more incendiary term that has and will continue to be omitted from this story for sake of diplomacy. "Pardon me, sir, but the necessity for insults, especially regarding those in my company, is of no particular use, nor will it be tolerated." The shopkeeper's face seemed to instantly redden, and just as he was about to respond, Catherine came to the forefront, placing a hand on her brother's shoulder. The older holding Lydia's hand, saying, "We offer our sincerest apologies for any inconvenience our presence may have occasioned. Being strangers to this place, we were unaware of the circumstances that prevail here. We shall take our leave forthwith." And with not one more sound, Edward followed Catherine and Lydia out the bell, jingling once more as the door swung shut behind them. Outside, he took a deep breath, his hands trembling slightly as he adjusted his coat. "I apologize for that, Miss Lydia," he said, looking both regretful and embarrassed. His behaviour was utterly unacceptable. "Had I been aware, I would have never brought you here." She met his gaze, her expression calm. "You have nothing to apologize for, Mr. Edward."
I render him as the only individual that should beg pardon.
Edward nodded, but did not reply, his jaw still tight. Catherine, her face pinched with discomfort, fanned herself briskly. "The audacity— Scoundrel," she remarked. "Let us hope we shall never again be obliged to encounter him." The three agreed, before Edward stated, "Let us return to the carriage. Give no thought of the occurrence, for I have arranged box seats." The ride to the Norfolk Theatre was not as joyous as one would hope, considering the previous occurrence. "You shall adore it, Lydia," Edward said, in an attempt to invoke happiness.
I read that dances may also be included during the intermission.
Chapter 4. From the store, Nathan drove the carriage to the other end of the town, where the theatre was located, before stopping for the party to exit, and then pulling behind another vehicle. Lydia and the wealthy siblings made headway to the box office keeper's booth immediately.
"How can I help you, mister?"
A middle-aged white-haired fellow asked. "3 for the Devil's Bridge, please, sir. The full programme," Edward replied, handing the man $6. He looked at the money without taking it then to Edward, before settling his preference on Lydia. "She with you?" he asked, unwilling to avert his eyes from the black. Edward looked toward Lydia, then back. Yes, she most certainly is. What claim is your stake in the matter? The men stared at one another for a moment, caught up in the tension between old thoughts and new feelings. I'll tell you this, the man said. We run it the way we want to in our country, and if you don't like it... Edward scowled his face, but the man took no heed. Then you can go back to yours, he concluded with a fold of his arms and broadened chest. Edward was not in the least accustomed to being spoken to in this manner, nor was Catherine to hearing it, leading her to take a step between them, but before she could say a word, Lydia spoke.
Mr. and Miss Ashbourne, she began, her hands trembling with embarrassment. I, in no capacity or form, have absolutely any intention to be a burden in any way to your travels.
Please permit me to allow you to your leave. I much prefer to wait in the coach, if at all practical. Please, she pleaded. Catherine and Edward looked at each other before looking down and back at Lydia. And this is what you desire? Edward asked. Lydia looked at him for a moment, clutching her hands together before saying, Sir, for the sake of serenity, it is. Despite their current displeasure, Edward and Catherine agreed to proceed without her company. Nathan was to convey her back to the plantation, a task he undertook with the intention of subsequently returning to the theatre, where he would await the Ashbournes' return. After being seated, Edward and Catherine discussed what had occurred, while the theatre buzzed with quiet anticipation. Other patrons settled into their seats as the chandeliers above cast a warm golden glow over the crimson velvet. Edward reclined uneasily in his chair, his arms crossed and his gaze fixed upon the stage, though the curtain had yet to rise. The low hum of conversation around them, a symphony of restrained laughter and rustling silk, served only to deepen the weight of his thoughts. Beside him, Catherine adjusted her gloves, her composure outwardly intact, though her brow betrayed the disquiet that lingered between them. Edward, she began at last, her tone low yet insistent. I cannot help but feel most unsettled by what has occurred. That Lydia should be denied entrance in such a manner, it is beyond comprehension. The distress that she must have endured. Edward turned his head. It is intolerable, he replied. Father told me that Lydia may be rather shocked by certain elements of the American society. It was a mistake to have brought her. Did you not know? Catherine asked.
Had I known, she and you both would at the time be warm in your beds in Kent.
How could you not know? She asked. You mentioned you had visited. Last spring, I believe you said it was. That was Upper Canada, in the region of Ontario. Father sent me forth to look into a fur venture. That is the nearest I have come to this place, though now I wish it were not for Lydia's sake in the least. The siblings' anxious discourse lingered until the rising of the curtain marked the commencement of the evening's performance, compelling their thoughts, however briefly, to the matter at hand. In the meantime, whilst Nathan was escorting Lydia home, they found occasion to converse. The carriage creaked softly as it made its way along the uneven path back to the plantation. Lydia sat upright, her hands clasped tightly in her lap, the cool evening air brushing against her face. Nathan, seated at the reins above, guided the horses with practised ease. After some moments of silence, Nathan asked, How you doing back there, Mum? Lydia, sitting in the dark carriage, lost in thought, looked up, replying, I am quite well, thank you. Nathan nodded, before focusing back on the road, wishing he could see her. After a few more minutes, she inquired, When shall we expect to reach our destination? It is growing deathly cold. A little less than an hour, Ma'am. Won't be long at all. She shivered as the wind brushed against her arms. Very well. Thank you, she relayed. Inspired by the pressing nature of his question and the tone of who asked, Nathan judged it advisable to bring the vehicle to a standstill. Lydia, puzzled by this sudden stop, could not help but wonder what was amiss. Is everything of order? She asked, growing frustrated. Everything fine, ma'am, he responded. Nathan stepped down from the carriage and closed the windows, thereby increasing the warmth inside, only to open her door and let the cold air rush back in. He then presented her with the blanket he had been using, though she was oblivious to the discomfort he suffered as a result. Thank you, sir, she said, taking it.
He had never been addressed as sir, he thought,
retaking his seat on the carriage and continuing driving, now shivering in the cold. Seeking partially to alleviate the awkwardness of the ride, and in part further warm herself, Lydia began. Betsy tells me you work for Mr. Munro as well, your occupation being a driver and blacksmith? Yes, ma'am, he responded, barely able to speak through the sudden vibrations in his jaw. His hands continued to grow numb until he finally asked, Whereabouts y'all from? Kent, she replied proudly. In the southeastern part of the country. Have you ever been? Nathan laughed to himself at the thought. No, ma'am, I ain't never even left Virginia.
Except when they traded me when I was a little boy.
Traded? She asked, perplexed by his terming. Yes, ma'am. Kept my mamma and daddy in Florida and sent me up here. Pardon me, sir. I am not certain I understand. Lydia leaned forward at this moment, intrigued to the greatest extent. I don't know what else way to say it, ma'am. What do you mean, traded? He looked back toward the carriage, glad she was not privy to his disposition.
I mean, when I was a boy, Mr. Munro then needed himself some mohans to help out, since malaria took away a good number.
So he sent some folks on down and around to buy up as many as he could get, and I was one of 'em. Guess they ain't have no use for Mum and Daddy since she was half blind, and Daddy was broke down more than they thought. Lydia couldn't believe it. The words he spoke. Were they true? Do you see them often? She asked, forgetting about the air still seeping in. Nathan's laughter escaped him, causing Lydia to look forward in wonder. What could be so funny? She was on the verge of asking when he explained, No, ma'am, I suppose I don't even remember how they look. Why don't you visit them? I'm sure they would appreciate it. Ma'am, if it was that easy, I believe Massa Munro wouldn't have nobody left to work for him. He ended, a faint giggle escaping his lips. As Lydia continued to ponder his words, he interrupted her thoughts with yet more. I'm sorry, ma'am, for what happened in the town. Heard they put on some mighty fine shows down there. Lydia glanced upward, surprised that he chose to address the subject, but appreciative of his sentiment. You need not apologize, sir. It was hardly your doing.
You ain't got to call me sir, ma'am.
Everybody here call me Nathan. Is that what you prefer I address you as? It's what I'm used to, ma'am, and ain't got no quarrels with you using my name. Well, if that is what you choose, then that is what it will be. Now, Nathan, am I to come to the understanding that you nor any of the other Negroes can freely leave Mr. Munro's premises? Yes, ma'am, that's about right, lest we get a pass. Lydia thought for a moment. If we are to go the route of the informal Nathan, she continued, I suggest it only prudent to address me by my name as well.
Lydia,
she suggested, causing him to smile, forgetting about the chilly wind, if only for a moment. That sound mighty good to me, Miss Lydia, he replied. And with that, Lydia bundled up in the blanket, closed her eyes, and drifted off. Chapter 5. In the dimly lit room, the faint glow of a candle flickered, casting shadows that danced upon the walls, as Lydia sat at the bed's edge, if you could call it that, her book open before her. She hardly noticed the soft knock at the door until it opened its gentle creak, a stark contrast to the stillness of the night. Expecting to see Betsy, her complete opposite in Edward appeared and bowed. Mr. Edward? She asked, rising hastily from her feet to return the gesture. Is something wrong? No, all is well. I merely wished to ensure your health and comfort. How do you fare?
You are well, I hope.
Yes, very much so, thank you, sir. Pray tell, did you and Lady Catherine find the theatre performance to your liking? Yes, yet surely it remained unfortunate that you were unable to accompany us, not only for your own enjoyment, but it would have also done nothing less than enhance I and my sister's enjoyment of the festivities. Was the journey back to your liking? It was, Mr. Edward. They stood in silence for a moment, looking about the room, endeavouring to anticipate their next words.
With a startling suddenness he said, "Miss Lydia."
I am compelled to tender my most heartfelt apologies to you. Had I anticipated the challenges you would endure, I would have spared you this ordeal. Lydia took a step toward him. Mr. Edward, you have no reason to apologise, for you did not know. What is more, your advocacy on my part is a kindness for which I am deeply grateful. It was the least I could do, he stated. If it pleases you, Miss Lydia, I will arrange for your return in a week's time. I would perfectly comprehend if this were your decision. Lydia looked toward the door for a moment. Mr. Edward, although I appreciate your concern, she began, that will not be necessary. I am well aware of Miss Catherine's desire for my presence, and I intend to stay. Surely she will understand, Edward urged. It is a trifling matter, Lydia replied. The weather makes up for the people, minus the heat. His lips twitched into a small smile. Lydia, as beautiful as she is humorous, he commented.
A habit of mine, I'm afraid, she replied, returning the gesture.
I shall tell Catherine that you are in good spirits, he concluded, arising from the small wooden chair. Her gaze lingered on him as he turned to leave. Good night, Lydia, he said. Good night, Mr. Edward, she replied before watching him close the door with a gentle grace only a touch deserved. Chapter 6. A week had elapsed as Lydia stood outside with Betsy, attempting to assist her in the task of suspending the clean linens on the clothesline, allowing the fresh air to facilitate their drying, in an effort to make herself more useful.
As Miss Catherine was with Mrs. Munro,
Lydia, ever attentive to her attire, had gathered the folds of her skirt to avoid the dampness of the ground, her slender fingers deftly pinching the corner of a linen sheet as Betsy reached for the other. Together they stretched the cloth across the length of the line, the gentle breeze catching it with a gust. Least we outside.
Better than being in that hot house,
Betsy remarked, straightening her back and planting her hands on her hips. Lydia gently touched her handkerchief to her forehead, endeavouring to cool the perspiration that had arisen from her exertions while resuming her misplaced breath. You ain't used to this work, is you, Miss Lydia? Betsy asked with a grin. Lydia cast her eyes downward, her brow glistening with dew that had begun to trickle down her face as she endeavoured to compose herself. After a brief interval, she lifted her gaze once more, her eyes meeting Betsy's. I assure you, 'tis not the work that is foreign, dear Betsy, but the heat. Betsy chuckled amused, having never met a Negro anything like Lydia. You ain't got no brothers or sisters back where you from? She inquired. Lydia's gaze wandered her thoughts, drifting to the recollection of her siblings. A gentle smile played upon her lips as she indulged in the memories of her family, her fondest since birth. I am fortunate to have a younger sister who celebrated her 18th only less than 2 months before now,
she said, a hint of fondness colouring her words,
and an elder brother who is 6 and 20. He is very much the pride of my family. And you? Lydia returned. Betsy paused for but a moment. I got a sister. Esther, her name, she answered before quickly resuming work. Younger than me by a year. She was sold when we was little. Can't remember how old. Ain't sure where she at now. She shrugged in resignation. And ain't seen her since, but remember she had the greenest eyes. Only one of us I ever seen with 'em.
Even you ain't got those, she said, attempted to humour.
Lydia's own brown eyes widened in astonishment, her expression betraying the confusion that had beset her as a result of the unexpected candour.
Why do you not inquire upon her location?
She asked, fearing her curiosity too intrusive. Betsy rose, releasing a pair of wet breeches from her grasp, which soon fell upon the damp grass beneath her with a soft rustle. "Honey, you think I ain't asked? Massa Monroe and the rest of them whites show ain't gon' tell me nothin', and don't nobody else know. I ain't even show she's still in Virginia." "Dear Betsy," Lydia said, taking a step forward, "I have no words for your situation, but do offer my heartfelt sympathy, how ineffective to the aforementioned it may be," she ended, clasping her hands together. Betsy shrugged, offering indignation toward the memory itself. "Ain't like I can do nothin' 'bout it," she said, continuing her work. "But I sure appreciate it." Lydia smiled a smile of hopefulness, her forehead showing compassion. Their conversation was suddenly interrupted by the sound of hoofbeats as a carriage came into view along the dusty path leading to the yard. Lydia's eyes unbidden followed its approach, her gaze settling on Nathan as he brought the vehicle to a halt. He descended with practiced ease, his frame straight, and his movements deliberate as he began unhitching the horses that seemed entirely confident by his mere presence. Betsy, perceiving the length of Lydia's gaze, allowed a knowing smile to play upon her lips. Partially desiring to divert the course of their discourse, she called out to him with a playful air. "Hey, Nathan!" she yelled. Lydia's eyes immediately snapping from him to her. "Come on over here when you get done," she continued, the grin ever so widening on her face. Lydia had wondered why her heart began to rush as Nathan paused, shifting his gaze towards them before meandering in their direction. "What can I do for you, Betsy?" he asked upon approaching. Without hesitance, she stated, "I think Miss Lydia here want to know about you." Lydia's cheeks flushed. She'd never known such embarrassment.
That is to say, since a boy she was quite drawn to gave her a flower for her 10th birthday,
whilst both his and her parents were in company. No, she should think this was even worse than that. Lydia drew herself in a more distinguished position, willing her voice to remain steady.
"I do not,"
she countered, her tone tinged with embarrassment. "Betsy has quite the imagination." Nathan, now interested, looked over to Lydia. "What's going on, Miss Lydia? Need help with something?" Lydia's mouth barely widened as her eyes darted about. The inspiration for Betsy's desire to expose her to such embarrassment she possessed no notion. At length she returned her attention to the handsome man whose patient smile had awaited her reply. "Good day, sir, but pardon, but I do believe Betsy is mistaken. I gave no inclination of the sort." Nathan glanced between the two women, his face masked with perplexion, before turning toward Lydia and inquiring, "So you been doing all right, Miss Lydia?" "Very well, thank you. Although the mosquitoes have proven quite impertinent and unwelcoming." Nathan looked to Betsy, who swiftly assisted. "Nets," she said, to which he nodded, lifting his brows in acknowledgement. "That's why I try to wear long sleeves if I can stand the heat," he replied with a grin. She noted how beautifully cheerful his smile was, despite the circumstances he was born into. She looked into his eyes, and he into hers, as though wholly unaware of Betsy's presence. For what seemed like an eternity, silence lingered between them until at last shattered by Nathan saying, "Well,
I gotta get on finishing something for Massa Monroe."
but it was so nice seeing y'all," he ended. With a gentle bend, Lydia offered a modest curtsy. Nathan tipped his hat before he turned and strode toward a shed. Lydia, for her part, busied herself with the last of the linens, her thoughts uncharacteristically scattered as the afternoon sunlight warmed her cheeks. Said Betsy, behind her, snapping her out of the dreamlike state. Looking over to see her smile, while folding a shirt rays glistening off her bright white teeth, she asked, "Pray, what is it that amuses you so?" Betsy's grin grew wider as she shook her head. Glancing at Lydia, she answered,
"Ain't nothing, Litty."
"Just thinking about something." Without haste, Lydia ceased the completion of her task to address Betsy, further demanding,
"And might I beg to know the subject of your thoughts, as I quite enjoy laughing as well."
But Betsy's smile only grew wider as her mirth, once restrained, was now entirely audible. At last, Betsy, collecting herself, addressed Lydia.
"Now, Litty, you ain't got to hide like in Nathan."
"Everybody like Nathan." Lydia started, her cheeks tinged with a warmth that for once not born of the sun, though she quickly endeavoured to mask her sensibilities. "My dear Betsy,
"I mean no offence."
but that is an absolute falsehood, and beyond my understanding as to its derivation," she replied, her tone betraying a hint of unsteadiness. "I assure you, I hold no such regard." Yet her hurried glance toward the ground seemed to suggest otherwise. Chapter 7. Weeks later,
Edward and Lydia sat.
whilst Nathan steered the carriage, having only just left Catherine to her engagements with Miss Munro. The road homeward was less even than agreeable, and Lydia found herself dislodged with little grace as the carriage trundled along. She recovered herself appropriately enough, her thoughts lingering on the morning's venture. The sunrise at Norfolk Harbour had been magnificent. Edward, ever eager to orchestrate moments of grandeur, had assured both her and Catherine of the scene's worth, and it had indeed surpassed expectation. Seated aloft, Nathan held the reins with steady composure, while the murmur of conversation carried to him from within the carriage. Edward reclined, tapping his fingers gently on his thigh. "I think I shall miss this place," said he, thinking of the day's remaining events. "It is far more agreeable than Kent, or anywhere in England for that matter." Lydia, her gaze directed through the small window at the passing fields, inclined her head in polite agreement. "And what shall you do upon our return?" he inquired. For a moment she seemed to deliberate, her brow faintly furrowed, as though sifting through her thoughts. At length she replied, "I think I shall walk the streets of home, visit the market, and sleep once more in my own bed. All the smaller comforts denied me here, I suppose." Then, observing the troubled look which gathered in Edward's expression, she hastened to add, "Oh, but do not misunderstand me. It is not that I am dissatisfied. I merely miss home." Edward smiled faintly, as though to mask his disappointment, saying with sincerity, "I understand you perfectly, dear Lydia. But if it be any consolation, your presence here has made this place infinitely more tolerable." He smiled again, this time with more freedom. Lydia, though conscious of the moment's quiet intimacy, offered no sentimental return, for there was nothing she could say that would not betray a falsehood. "Besides the weather," she added, "at least the food has proven agreeable." "Very," Edward concurred, as though thankful for the shift. "If the journey back were not so interminably long, I might convey a small supply homeward," he added, with a wry smile conjuring her genuine laugh. He lingered on the sight of her lips, then ventured, "Excuse me, but may I be so bold to state the observance of a friend?" Lydia, though uncertain of his intent, replied, "Yes, of course." He hesitated for a moment, whether from nerves or the jolting carriage, until, in due course, he met her gaze with a shyness that rendered him more earnest, confessing, "Permit me to say, though it may seem forward, that your smile is quite incomparable." His mouth lingered open, as if to reply to a response he had not yet received. His remark, so unforeseen, caused her composure to falter for but a moment before she replied, "Thank you, Edward." She managed, knowing well this was an insufficient answer in comparison to the remark. Their acquaintance following their adolescence had never given much occasion for such sentiments. Maturity had divided their pursuits, his for business and hers apprenticeship. And yet Edward had said no unkind words to her. She did indeed care for him, as one would a dear friend, but the affection in his eyes, so tender, so revealing, suggested that his regard had persevered through his youth and continued into adulthood. If he believed it concealed, he was mistaken. Edward had never quite mastered the art of disguising his feelings. Perhaps sensing that his candour had overstepped, he turned back to the window with a quiet sigh. Yet his discomfort was soon allayed when Lydia, with a teasing air, observed, "I have always thought my teeth too large to be of much beauty." Edward looked at her in astonishment, before laughing heartily pleased to find her humour unclouded. "That is quite ridiculous," he replied. "They are perfect. Everything about you is perfect. I shall hear no more of it." A blush rose to Lydia's cheeks, though she sought to quell it, bringing her face closer to the breeze entering through. "And where are you to accompany Mr. Munro?" she asked. "Ah, yes, we are to go hunting." "And what will you hunt?" she inquired. "Stag, most likely," he replied, "lest it be something smaller should fortune fail us. And you, how should you occupy the daylight?" "And I," said she, "it is probable I shall engage in occupations of a gentler nature. I have been much engrossed in a novel of late, Mansfield Park. Your sister lent it to me, and I find it delightful. It is written by a woman from Hampshire, Jane Austen. Perhaps you are of acquaintance?"
"I cannot say that I am,"
said Edward. "I have little time for reading in the name of pleasure."
"Ah,"
she smiled. "That is a pity. But if ever you change your mind, I should be glad to lend it to you. And perhaps," she continued, "I shall spend the day's remaining hours sewing, if Betsy is not too occupied to assist me." It was thus that their conversation turned to lighter matters until the carriage drew to a halt and Edward alighted to join Mr. Munro for his afternoon's sport. Nathan turned the carriage back toward the plantation, while Lydia, with a measured sigh, settled herself once more against the firm upholstery of her seat. Following his departure, Lydia's mind remained preoccupied with the peculiarities of Edward's recent outspokenness. Nathan meanwhile maintained a silence, also pondering the preceding conversation. As they turned onto the plantation lane, it was Nathan who decided to begin a new one. "The harbour show was nice this morning," he said, his tone more cautious than before. "It was," Lydia replied, smiling, as she looked up toward him. Nathan inclined his head, his countenance thoughtful. "And Miss Catherine's show do seem nice. She ain't nothing like the white ladies I ever met." "Indeed," Lydia replied, her tone carrying the calm assurance of conviction. "She is a being of true benevolence." Scarcely had these words escaped her lips when Nathan at length gave utterance to a further observation. "And her brother seemed like the nicest white man I ever set eyes on. Sure do treat you nice." He ventured, the hesitation in his voice evident as though he scarcely dared to speak the sentiment aloud. Lydia, energized by the remark, straightened in her seat, her gaze fixing itself sharply upon Nathan's back, as if it might penetrate the very fabric of his coat. "Yes," she returned with composure, though her voice carried a distinct edge. "He is without question a most respectable gentleman." She'd scarcely finished speaking, and begun to hope the matter might now be concluded, when Nathan, emboldened by her response, ventured further. "So out where you from whites and blacks can get married?" The import of his query, unmistakable in its implications, sent a rush of indignation through Lydia, though she was quick to compose herself. Leaning forward, she addressed him with deliberate care. "Mr. Nathan," she began, her tone measured, and her words precise, "I must assure you the nature of my acquaintance with Mr. Edward is founded solely upon the bonds of friendship, and moreover, the shared affection for a dearly beloved sister." Nathan, though visibly abashed, allowed the silence to linger a moment before offering a quiet response. "Well," he said at last.
Wish I had a friend like that.
Lydia remained silent, choosing to let the comment dissipate into the passing air. Fortunately, his smirk was concealed from her view, just as her countenance was hidden from his. Seeking to ease any tension, Nathan resumed with a lighter tone. "Well, anyway, I'm glad you people treat you right. I hurt my foot messin' with Blaze. He's the main horse." "Indeed?" Lydia asked, her tone shifting to one of mild curiosity. "I could not tell. I bruised my foot as well the other day, when my shoe buckle gave way during a walk with Miss Catherine." Nathan turned, slightly gesturing toward his shed as the plantation came into view. "I reckon I got just the thing for that," he said with quiet confidence. "Made an extra buckle not too long ago when Betsy broke hers. That is precisely what is required." "And what is your charge for such a repair?" she inquired. "I would hardly wish to inconvenience Miss Catherine with more visits to the market in town on my behalf, if it could ever be avoided." "Wouldn't be nothin'," he replied. "Been sittin' there for weeks." Minutes later, he halted the carriage, and the two made their way to his shed. Its interior was dimly lit and warmed by the lingering heat of the forge. The air hung heavy with the scent of iron, and Lydia's eyes surveyed the multitude of tools and creations that filled the space. She observed with a thoughtful curiosity the hammers, tongs, and files alongside more delicate works, a horseshoe, a candlestick, and a curious slender band of iron lying unfinished upon a table. "A great many implements," remarked Lydia, her gaze alighting upon the band. "And what," she beseeched, "might this be?" Turning around, his gaze followed hers to the band she now held, and he approached, saying, "Oh, that's just another thing Massa Munro want me to make. Between this and drivin', he keep me busy." "Oh, here go the buckle," he said, retrieving the item from a high shelf. "Hope it fit ya," he concluded, handing her the iron trinket. Lydia examined the item approvingly, accepting it with a gracious smile. "I am much obliged to you. Betsy and I share similar sizes, though she is much taller. And am I to be completely certain that you will take no payment?" Nathan shrugged modestly, then after a pause added, "It ain't nothin', Miss Lydia. Just hope you like it." Lydia repeated her appreciation before continuing to look about the room. For such a valuable skill, surely such requires years of study. "Yes, ma'am. Big Jim. He the one that taught me everything I know." "Was he a professor at the university?" His expression betrayed his astonishment. "University?" he asked. "Yes, your schooling?" she clarified, though unsure why she had the need to. "Oh, I ain't go to no school, Miss Lydia. Big Jim was the one who came foamy, born here, and died 'bout 2 years back round, right where you standin'," he said, remembering. "Heart attack." Lydia gasped, placing a hand to her own chest, clutching the item.
"I am deeply saddened by your news," she offered, taking a step forward.
Nathan shook his head, answering, "Oh, it ain't nothin'. It was long past his time anyway. Couldn't hardly walk." "Still," she remarked, "I offer my sincerest condolences. A man of your talents must have read a great many books, at least, along with your tutoring," she remarked. Nathan shook his head yet again. "No, ma'am, all Big Jim. Don't even know how to read."
Don't none of us do.
A puzzled frown creased her lips. "How could I not have observed this?" she murmured, her voice laced with quiet astonishment. "No one had enlightened me." As the pieces of the puzzle fell into place, a wave of clarity washed over her. Betsy's reluctance to queries regarding her preferred authors and titles, the aversion, too, on the many occasions she would invite her, read when asked once, shrouded in mystery, now stood starkly illuminated. It was not disinterest that had held her back, but rather an inability born of a cruel and unjust system. What manner of nation, she mused, would seek to suppress the very pursuit of knowledge, to deny its citizens the liberation of literacy? The injustice of it all stung a grave illustration of the surrounding institutions' insidious nature. It was, as she now recognized, a bondage that extended far beyond the physical shackling the mind and spirit in an equally unyielding grasp. Releasing herself from these contemplations, she stated, "Perhaps one day you shall learn. It is never too late. My own mother was 30 when she wrote her first word, and father older than that." "Maybe so," he said quietly, shrugging, seemingly indifferent to the notion. Lydia thanked him once more for the buckle and took her leave, bidding him farewell. Both thought of the other following their separation until sleep, Lydia being surprised that he also was her first thought upon awakening the next morning. Chapter 8. Weeks later,
Lydia accompanied Miss Catherine on yet another venture,
due to her insistence. Mrs. Munro had recommended Catherine to her personal tailor, among the region's most proficient, whose residence was well worth the visit and accessible by boat. Just as the previous excursion, she remained in the back with the other black individuals. They stood, sat or lay in a sultry room that was quite compact, forced to remain until the voyage was over. The soiled, stiff wooden floor connecting to the windowless walls proved Lydia's chief concern,
as she refused to allow the sweaty underneath to desecrate her damp skin.
Most slept, and those that could not stared at Lydia for the duration, though she was thankful that duration would only last an hour. Lydia practically began to glow when the boat anchored, more impatient than usual, although this was not her natural inclination. She soon met Catherine below, and as they walked, the sun kissed their foreheads while the shade of the overhead leaves interrupted the rays. The softest muslin, its hue a pale celestial blue, as though it were woven from the very skies themselves, she began. The bodice is adorned with the finest embroidery, delicate sprigs of white flowers, each petal so finely wrought that they seem almost real. Lydia pretended to be interested, as she smiled and nodded in approval at Catherine's ideas, still damp from the boat ride. Much to her dismay, instead of taking a carriage north near the town of Smithfield to the Cobb Plantation 1 mile away, Catherine preferred that they walk the extra half-mile, serving as the unofficial scenic route, as Mrs. Munro had recommended it. They eventually rounded the corner, Catherine remarking on the beauty of the perfectly aligned hedges introducing the tailor's plantation, not exceeding 100 yards in distance.
Once inside, Lydia stood waiting while both Catherine and the tailor entered a fitting room for measurements.
Minutes later she concluded that she could bear it no longer, for her feet were in dire need of an alternate position, preferably horizontal. In doing so, she promptly exited the room, deciding to wait outside, as surely no one would object to her presence on the edge of the portico. Soon after she was seated, Lydia heard movement begin behind, and then around the circumference of the property. A black woman appeared, obviously startled by the stranger's presence. Lydia grew nervous as the women observed each other and wondered who would speak first before the woman approached, saying, "Girl, get off that porch, foe, you get whipped." Judging the gravitational weight her tone held, she considered her adherence best, standing immediately. "I apologize, I was very
Honey, I don't know what's wrong with you,"
she interrupted. "And ain't never seen you before, but master catch you restin', he gon' make it where you can't sit no mo." As the woman drew closer, Lydia could see she was about 15 years her senior. "They pick you up today?" she asked. "I ain't heard about no slave auctions." Lydia took offence upon the realization that the woman thought her also to be a slave. "Forgive my intrusion, but I am not a slave and could know of no auction," she retorted. "I am merely assisting Miss Catherine to acquire a dress from the tailor, whom I could only presume as your keeper." The woman discerned her, suspicion permeating through her pupils. "Oh, I see," she remarked. "It's sure been a lot of people round here since he got the new linen."
Why you ain't in the house?
I needed to take seat, for I simply could not suffer the pain in my feet for a moment longer. Even now it tingles at my nerves, and I may ask now that you know I am not of an auction's origin, do you find it acceptable that I resume my prior activity of leisure? She continued to look at Lydia curiously before saying, "Go on ahead, I guess," to which Lydia sank to the ground.
"What you mean you ain't no slave? And why you talk like that?"
After explaining the circumstances of what felt like her existence to the bewildered woman who only halfway believed her words to be true, and even that portion was colluded in misunderstanding, the woman introduced herself as one of the house slaves, even inviting her new acquaintance to the main garden near the road. Luckily, the view provided the observance of the tailor's front door to his large estate,
allowing Lydia's notification to Catherine's leave upon completion of the purpose of their visit, whenever that may be.
She sat in the shade while the woman trimmed the hedges. Lydia removed her shoes before massaging her feet, which appreciated the attentiveness that was, by all accounts, past due. Hearing another woman's voice, Lydia looked up to see yet another unfamiliar face exit the home, drawing near to their position. Perceiving her growing distress, the older woman mentioned, "Oh, you ain't got nothing to worry about with her," she assured Lydia. "Hey, Mary," the younger woman greeted entering. "Hey, Esther, see we got somebody new," she said, gesturing to the strangely dressed woman seated beneath. Esther cast her gaze downwards and to her left, beholding the new face, whose body was arranged with as much ladylike composure as her frame would permit. Their eyes met, Lydia's growing presently wider as she observed the striking, brilliant green emeralds peering back, a stark and arresting contrast to the depth of her complexion. Her mouth instantly dropped open, reminded of an observation Betsy had once imparted in one of their many previous chats. "She all right in the head?" Esther asked Mary, the manner of the odd woman's gaze not escaping her. "Yeah, but maybe the heat done got to her," the older slave remarked. Taking count of her demeanour, Lydia slowly arose, saying, "Forgive me. I confess myself a trifle discomposed," she began. "And your name is Esther?" she further inquired, taking a step forward. Esther looked to Mary and then back to the foreigner before cautiously replying, yeah." Lydia could scarce credit her ears or even her very sight, yet felt bound to ascertain the truth of the singular situation. After observing her with an intensity far exceeding the bounds of mere politeness, she at length ventured the inquiry she longed to make. "Pray, do you happen to possess a sister, one, perhaps, by the name of Betsy?" Esther, shaken and quite astonished, presently inclining her head, replying,
"Yeah, I had a sister named Betsy. Ain't seen her since we was little. You know her?"
she inquired, eagerness and excitement conquering her former apprehension and fear as she advanced a single pace. Lydia's heart quickened. "Yes, I do believe so." And not as soon as she answered, Esther's face shone that of one who had seen a ghost as her hands began to shake.
"That can't be," she said,
growing ever so much closer. "Last I heard she got sold to somebody down in Florida." "I assure you it is true," Lydia stated matter-of-factly.
"She currently resides in the Monroe Plantation, where she is employed in the home.
We share a room together outside, and have done so since my arrival. I must say, she is, I find, possessed of a lively pleasantry and a remarkably serviceable temper, and will be undoubtedly delighted to become aware of your location. I shall notify her immediately upon our return." Esther expressed her gratitude, and the two presently fell into an incessant discourse, chiefly regarding the circumstances of their departure, as well as the present tenor of Betsy's time on the plantation, until, after hours had passed, Catherine at length emerged from the house. Upon her return, Lydia adhered to her promise, leaving Betsy, who initially incredulous became ecstatic. At the moment, Lydia described her sister in greater detail. "I can't believe I done been by there plenty of times, and ain't never even knew," she burst. "Praise God," she continued, crying as tears cascaded from within. Some weeks subsequently, Nathan, having but lately returned from his drive, was occupied in his shed upon some trifling pursuit, when a distinct summons sounded at the door. His mood was instantly elevated, ushering both surprise and gratification, when he beheld none other than Lydia standing upon his threshold, bearing a small parcel wrapped in brown cloth. "What can I do for you, Litty? Ain't broke another shoe buckle, did you?" "Oh, no," she replied, returning his smile. I thought to leave an article for your acceptance, she said, unwrapping the cloth to reveal a sponge cake and lamb chops. Edward, after returning, rendered these items and more to her, in the hopes of raising her spirits. Both unable and unwilling to engorge herself with the lot, she decided it best to share the remainder with Nathan. His eyes lit up, as never had he been so fortunate to experience the taste of either. Please take this as a token of gratitude for your assistance, she said. And too, Betsy desired to know if you could convey a word to Esther. Nathan raised his eyes from the gift's aroma, invoking his mouth to water, before agreeably saying, Head out Friday to take Mr. Edgar up the river again, so I think I'll be able to do that. I can tell she showed to appreciate you finding her sister.
Ain't never seen her this happy before.
Just at that juncture, a sudden recollection struck him. He turned about and retrieved an article from a distant shelf across the room, and upon said return, Nathan held forth a slender bracelet. It was wrought from that very iron band upon which she had bestowed a remark during her initial visit. It was immediately apparent to Lydia that much painstaking labour had evidently been devoted to its intricate design, as her eye now rested upon the delicate floral patterns etched into its sides.
Finished that up yesterday, he said,
as she admired it closely. Got it for you. Sure hope you like it.
I do, yes.
It shall be my most prized possession from the Americas, she assured him, much to his relief. But I must ask, what is the occasion? Oh, I just thought I'd make something nice for you, that's all. Just wish I could have put your name on it or something. As she smiled, offering a gentle nod and allowing her gaze to return to the unexpected gift, a sudden thought struck Lydia. She then raised her eyes to him, responding, Come now. Propriety demands you must begin by announcing your own name. He looked at her curiously before stepping aside as she moved past him. Nathan turned to see her set the bracelet down and pull out his small wooden stool. Standing over it, Lydia faced him. He stared at her before she finally said, Will you accompany me or choose to remain there standing? You simply cannot go through life unable to read or write. Whilst he partook of his meal, she commenced instructing him in the rudiments of the alphabet. Their studies continued for many hours, during which he repeatedly stepped forth from the shed to ascertain that none were stirring abroad. Very well, she concluded upon their completion. I must admit that you possess quite an uncommon quickness of apprehension. Thank you, he said, concluding the last morsel of the cake, not entirely grasping the word's meaning, yet caring little for them, for so excellent was the fare. It is no surprise to me that someone so mentally capable as yourself had the ability to reach such an esteemed position in relation to your peers
without the basic ability of written communication,
she continued, rising from her seat and reclaiming her bracelet. Will you be available for another lesson tomorrow night? Lydia asked. After his agreement to her proposal, she again expressed her gratitude for the bracelet and presently took her leave. Nathan, now perfectly realizing the significance of an A, the first of many, 26 to be exact, spent the remainder of the night, until sleep claimed him much later, occupied with devising every word that contained the newly revealed letter. Chapter 9. Lydia seated herself beside Catherine, as they both reposed by the margin of the lake, which bounded the plantation lands. The negroes observed with particular attention, never having witnessed this open degree of familiarity and ease between those of such disparate stations and aesthetics. Lydia affected not to notice the numerous dark countenances fixed upon them, whilst Catherine, from long habit or natural indifference, betrayed no similar consciousness. My word, they look at us as if we were Napoleon's mistresses, she observed, before continuing. I am resolved to soon go into town and have word of a citrus soap said to be extremely appealing to the realm of fragrances. I shall be sure to procure one for you. Is there aught else you should like me to obtain on your behalf? She reflected upon the benevolent gesture before it suddenly struck her. The single object that had most occupied her thoughts, a preoccupation occasioned by the gentleman himself from the very day of their first acquaintance. "Perhaps, if it is not too much trouble," she began, "a small volume, preferably educational in nature, displaying the alphabet and other such matters regarding the English language." Catherine straightened slightly, her brows lifting in mild surprise. "My dear Lydia, surely you could have no occasion for such, especially when you so ably assist your aunt in instructing the young negroes in Kent during the summer months." "It is merely a whim to ensure my mind stays occupied," she replied, in an effort to make light of the request. "I thought it might prove useful to review certain rules that may have eluded me." Catherine, shaking her head, pronounced, "I should greatly prefer to bestow upon you a more recent work of literature. I am persuaded you would derive considerably more gratification from that. I have heard much discourse concerning Northanger Abbey from my various acquaintances, and have long been desirous of perusing its contents. Perhaps we might peruse it in company, should it be in the shop's possession. Indeed, I am persuaded they must possess it. My dear, you have quite put me in mind of my own necessity to visit the booksellers, for I had but lately concluded every piece of literature I conveyed hither."
"Miss Catherine,"
she persisted, "I shamefully have yet to begin, much less finish many of the works in which I have conveyed to this place. I beg you to not buy any more on my behalf, for I will undoubtedly alert you if ever I should have further need. But I do ask that you provide the requested publication, so that I may indeed practice my diction." "If that is your wish," Catherine said at last, visibly frustrated. "I am most obliged," Lydia replied, pretending not to notice. Catherine leaned back once more, her attention drifting to the canopy of leaves above. The conversation lapsed into a comfortable silence, but the unspoken questions lingered, hanging in the air like the scent of the blossoms around them. The slaves, still watching from afar, whispered, their shallowed voices carrying the weight of their incredulity. Chapter 10. A week and some days having elapsed, Lydia and Nathan, after a period of intimate conversation, stood at the verge of the garden, which was in part concealed by the luxuriant foliage. By degrees, as their acquaintance ripened, they had achieved a degree of understanding far exceeding mere familiarity, and Lydia found herself, to her own surprise, entertaining a decided partiality for his character, a circumstance she had scarcely anticipated or even conceived possible. "I'll see you later on, Miss Litty?" he asked, with all the childlike eagerness on an adolescent addressing the first member of the opposite sex to weigh his intention. "Quite possibly," she replied, her eyes soft. Her hand, for a fleeting instant, clasped his with an unmistakable tenderness. Edward, rounding the corner, was struck with no small degree of astonishment when he saw the both of them in a more secluded place near the gin-house. A rush of indignation suffused him as his hand recoiled, clenching about the parcel he held until his knuckles betrayed a whiteness most ghastly. His chest heaved whilst his throat constricted. Somehow they remained insensible of his presence, and just as he prepared to advance, they parted. Nathan directed his steps to the opposite side, as if to rejoin the house by a more circuitous route, presumably to elude discovery. He was greatly tempted to detain him and declare his sentiments, but reflection bade him refrain, for he possessed neither the proper authority nor sufficient ground for such an interference. Lydia, on the contrary, approached where he stood, looking downward and lost in the memory of such a recent past. She bore a smile he had rarely observed personally, but often rendered to her, while her hand, with an air of unconscious satisfaction, lingered near the bracelet adorning her wrist. It was not, however, until she had almost collided with him that she became aware of his presence, arresting her steps with a sudden gasp. Edward's countenance betrayed a mixture of both wrath and bewilderment. Surely it was inappropriate to address his suspicion of this inconceivable union as a lover, although he shouldn't be kept from expressing his feelings, especially for the perceived betterment of a most beloved friend. "Miss Lydia," he began, ending the quiet, I have been looking for you. Mr. Edward, my apologies, for if I had known you were in search of me, I would have returned immediately. How may I be of service? I fear I do not know where Miss Catherine is." Edward took another step forward. "I wanted to give you this," he said, extending a shell of remarkable beauty and various hues. She received it, remarking, "This is indeed charming, Sir Edward." He nodded, before his gaze dropped to Lydia's wrist where her bracelet caught the light. "That is certainly an interesting item on your wrist," he remarked, gesturing. Her gaze fell, and she instantly comprehended his meaning, offering a slight inclination of her head. "Yes, one of the workers gave it to me as a gift," she replied, with an air of assumed indifference, desirous that he should pursue the subject no further. "Oh, did Betsy make it for you? I am aware that the both of you have greatly improved in your relationship. Catherine relayed it is a good thing, because in the least you have someone to speak with in her stead, however primitive and uneducated." Lydia narrowed her eyes before replying, "Sir Edward, you may find yourself taken aback by the knowledge they do possess, despite the illiteracy of their circumstances, and no Betsy, although kind, was not the bestower." Perceiving that she would require further prompting, Edward spoke with less reserve. "Was it, then, the gentleman whose hand I observed in your keeping as I approached but a moment since?" A quick flash passed through her eyes, plainly betraying her surprise at the question's sudden directness. "Ned, or something of the sort, I believe to be his name." "Nathan. His name is Nathan," she said. "And yes, he is the renderer. But no, I must disagree, sir. We were hardly holding hands." His gaze rested upon her for a moment, then shifted to the bracelet, before returning once more to her countenance. "Well, it is plainly evident that he holds you in particular esteem by the very manner of his regard. But surely you do not, you cannot return such sentiments. Indeed, I am persuaded you merely acted from a desire to be amiable, for I have always maintained that your sole failing lies in an over-eagerness to render satisfaction to those in need." Edward fixed upon her eyes, seeking an answer whilst she maintained a resolute silence, before at length averting her gaze to the moss. "This is the truth, isn't it?" he pressed, unwilling to accept her silence as confirmation to his stated belief. "Surely, Miss Lydia, you do not share the same affections and proclivities so obvious in his own demeanour. And I have observed a remarkable alteration in his spirits for the better whenever you are present to his view. What do you make of it?" After offering no reply, he said, "Lydia, surely you must see, surely you must understand, such associations are unwise. You are far above such company," before finally asking, "Do you approve of this, Nathan?" She drew herself up with a perceptible intake of breath and answered firmly, "Nathan is a man of the most estimable character, and his kindness is beyond dispute. His standing in the world holds no sway over my sentiments, but I must declare, sir, with the utmost respect, that your concern, though appreciated, is by any and all accounts misplaced. It is not as if we are to be wed. He is only someone whom I consider also a good friend, in which I happen to be very fond of, and furthermore his regard of me holds no weight on the reciprocal," she concluded. After searching her eyes, he believed her, leaving him happy, satisfied with her answer. "Forgive me, I beg, for having suffered it to escape my remembrance, that your understanding is quite as considerable as your amiability is pronounced. This is for you, he said, handing her the satchel he had been holding. Catherine mentioned you had asked for it. Lydia proceeded to open the parcel, and her countenance immediately brightened upon discerning that it was indeed the small volume for instruction she had so lately ventured to request. So completely, however, had her attention been engrossed by her private lessons with Nathan, that the very wish for such a possession had entirely escaped her remembrance. She received it, her countenance illuminated by a smile, and pronounced, "I am much obliged to you, sir." Lydia lifted the shell in her hand, bringing it to her face once more. "And I shall place this near my bedside," she concluded. His expression softened. "If you apply it to your ear, it is said one may discern the sound of the ocean," he relayed, a faint smile playing upon his lips. She immediately raised it to her own, the sound causing her lips to mirror his. "It's true," she said, "and what a calming sound it is. Well, I bid you farewell for now," he ended. "I must go tend to business. The 4th is but weeks away, and the Munros have planned quite the assembly. One might readily assume that the Americans would, by this juncture, be quite weary of war. Perhaps, however, when one has survived the wrath of a power such as our own, it does indeed call for some manner of annual celebration," he pronounced, with an air of remarkable confidence, despite having never himself known the experience of battle. "I wish you could attend." "Oh, yes," Lydia replied. "Betsy mentioned that you would all be abroad. Apparently, I shall not be in want of company, since even she and the others are permitted the day for celebration. We are merely crossing the river to meet with the governor at his residence. I am persuaded your own party will prove far more entertaining than ours. As I confess, I expect it to be rather dull. It is, in truth, more a matter of forming advantageous acquaintances amongst potential partners in business than anything else. Indeed, I am certain our own will prove little better. Between battling the gnats and the sun's oppressive rays, I shall hardly find leisure to enjoy any festivities. Though it is pleasant that they are afforded another day of ease, one of the few they truly possess. To witness their arduous labours makes me ever so appreciative of yourself and your family, I assure you." "I would have it no other way," he replied. "It should be no other way." "Sir Edward," she said, giving a slight curtsy. "Miss Lydia," he replied, inclining his head and turning to walk away. "I bid you good day." She watched his back as he receded from her view, her bracelet glinting brightly in the sunlight. Chapter 11. A fortnight had now elapsed, and the plantation presented a scene of lively revelry, given over to the celebration of the 4th of July. The air was alive with music and laughter, as the enslaved populace, seizing this rare moment of respite, partook of the general festivity with marked animation. Lydia herself was to be found amidst the various diversions, her customary reserve yielding somewhat to the infectious spirit of the occasion. Betsy, her dark eyes sparkling with unfeigned mirth, approached her, a ready smile playing upon her lips. "Miss Lydia, I just wanted to thank you again." "Whatever for, Betsy?" she asked as she watched the children dance. "For my sister. What else? Nathan been carrying my letters to her whenever he go that way. We found each other all thanks to you." Lydia's heart swelled with a quiet joy. "You are certainly most welcome," she responded. Later that evening, beneath the soft glow of the moon, Lydia was once again found unattended by Nathan. The usual playful banter was replaced by a melancholic tenderness, their impending separation casting a shadow over stolen moments. "And what's that one that looked like a sideways pitchfork again?" he asked, pointing to the paper. "E," she replied. As an elephant. He looked up at her, perplexed. It's an animal residing mainly in Africa, she explained. Oh, I wish I had more leisure to assist you in your studies. You are progressing far more rapidly than I could have ever imagined, she remarked, her voice betraying a hint of gratifying pride. Nathan chuckled softly, his eyes reflecting the moonlight. All thanks to you, Miss Lydia. I desire you to continue your studies, she said. Promise me you will not desist. I'm a keep learnin', Miss Lydia. I suppose you ready to get back on home? After a moment's reflection, she replied, Had you inquired of me upon our first arrival, my assent would have been immediate and unquestioning. I cannot, you see, reconcile myself to the inability of merely walking to town without being subjected to such impertinent attention. Yet, indeed, my heart quite aches for you, and now that I have suffered to know you better, I confess I have my reservations. Well, I sure appreciate it, he said, desiring more than ever to hold her. And ain't no need in feeling sorry for me, Miss Lydia. I'm used to it now. Always wanted to see something else, though. Something new. Look like you the closest thing I'ma get to that. Lydia struggled to suppress her rising tears. Perceiving her distress, he laid his hand gently upon hers, offering a slight, comforting movement. Don't matter none, he continued. I figure long as I seen you, ain't much use of seeing nothing else. She tilted her head, perplexed, before asking, Why should you ever say that? There are lands near and far in which I still dream of going. Withdrawing his hand and looking down, he replied, Well, seeing you the most beautiful thing I ever seen. I can't imagine wanting to see nothing else or going to look neither. At this point, Lydia could no longer stem the stream rolling down her cheeks as she turned away in the twilight, hoping Nathan might remain insensible to her distress. I hope I ain't say nothing wrong, Miss Lydia. No, not at all, she replied, shaking her head. I fear a gnat must have flown into my eye. This made him laugh, thus prompting her to do the same uncontrollably. So y'all got kings and queens out there? He asked once they had snapped out of their madness. As she eased the last of her faint chuckles, she responded, Ah, yes, indeed we do. Prince George, you see, is the Prince Regent. But how can a prince be a king? His father, King George, has fallen ill, though no one will speak of the affliction, so his son rules in his stead. Is there a queen? Yes, Queen Charlotte. Alas, she too may be indisposed, at least such is the general rumour. I cannot call to mind when last she even appeared publicly. And you like your king and queen? Initially disconcerted by the query, she paused in thought for a moment, before replying with candour. I confess I entertain but little regard for the prince, as he appears too much to consider the world's opinion of himself. But the king and queen, I, in common with many, do indeed hold in the highest estimation. Nathan nodded before asking, And you like this? Her gaze followed his, reaching the bracelet he made. Oh, I simply adore it, she remarked. Lydia possessed a considerable array of jewels, far more costly and of finer design, not only secured within her private apartments in Kent, but also among the select pieces brought with her to Betsy's chamber. Yet, in deference to his recent present, it was the sole ornament she permitted herself to adorn. Can I ask you something? Nathan shyly inquired. Of course. Lydia perked up, curious. He took a deep inhale and asked, How come you ain't got no man back home? Is it cause of Mr. Edward? Lydia's mouth opened as her eyes wandered, changing directions along with the rapid beats of her heart. Acknowledging the uncomfortability formed by the question, he began. I'm sorry, Miss Lee. No, nothing is the matter, she interrupted. Indeed, it is true that the attentions of Mr. Edward may, upon occasion, appear somewhat pointed, but his deportment has ever remained entirely proper. He has, in truth, conducted himself towards me with unvarying, gentlemanlike propriety since our earliest acquaintance in childhood. As for the solicitations of other gentlemen, I confess that, contrary to the earnest wishes of my mother, and, indeed, my mistress, I am resolved to follow the dictates of my own heart's inclinations, rather than to be swayed by the mere prospect of fortune. Moreover, a woman of my complexion can scarcely aspire to any considerable degree of wealth, a truth not wholly dissimilar to the circumstances of those within your own country, yet differing in extent. Noticing his blank stare, she ended, "So, to put it plainly, I simply refuse to settle for someone else's choice." Moments of silence passed before Nathan said, "If I were free, I wouldn't settle either. Until I found you," he stated bluntly. She found herself somewhat discomposed and endeavoured to suppress the rising smile, but the attempt proved entirely in vain. Lydia's eyes met his, and it instantly occurred to her that she had never before encountered a gentleman of such captivating charm. "Litty!" a voice called out. Her head turned sharply towards the sound. "Where you at?" the voice pursued. It was instantly familiar, and soon she recognized it with certainty. "Betsy." They could hear her approaching from around a shed. "Ah, yes, right here," Lydia called quickly, arising to her feet shortly followed by Nathan. "What you doin'?" Betsy asked, appearing from the darkness. "We was just talkin', Betsy. Have mercy. You need something?" Nathan inquired. "Oh, just talkin', huh?" She smiled. Lydia looked down in embarrassment. "You think you can help me take down these decorations?" Betsy finally revealed. As they walked back towards the festivities, Lydia noticed the vast array of decorations, refuse, and discarded items that needed tidying. She nodded, and the two quickly made their way back to the waning celebration. Nathan watched them, his gaze fixed upon his first love, while her thoughts were undoubtedly upon him. Chapter 12. One night in early August, Betsy and Lydia reposed in their respective beds in the chamber they jointly occupied in near silence. "We had a good time at the party," Betsy whispered. "How do you think that starts?" Lydia asked, holding the pen in her hand over the letter. "Well, I know you said wa sound is the double letter," she replied, her eyes searching the ceiling. Lydia nodded. "Yes, that's right. W. It's called W. Right, W." Lydia was pleased. Betsy proved herself also a fast learner. "Thank you so much, Litty," Betsy said after they had finished. "This the longest letter you done helped me write. I'm sure Esther will love it. I'll be sure to give this to Nathan soon as I see him tomorrow." "Oh, I can give it to him now if you like. He has his lessons next, so I am proceeding to that place." "That show would be nice of you," she said, handing the folded paper over. "Seem like you'll sure do like each other a lot. See you wearing that bracelet he made for you all the time. Now you even sleepin' with it, Miss Litty." She laughed. Despite her efforts to hide her own amusement, Lydia's lips curled and she blushed, looking away. "Oh, and I done forgot to tell you, Miss Catherine was axin' about you earlier. Don't know how I forgot." Lydia rose, thanking her, and bade her dearest friend good night, before she was presently led to find Catherine reposed in her accustomed reading chair by an open casement through which a gentle air drew inwards. "My dear Lydia, wherever have you been?" she inquired, affording her presence. "I have word of the utmost importance." "My apologies, Miss Catherine." "No worry, my dear. It is not a disaster. Quite the opposite." She smiled, arising and walking toward her. Lydia's countenance betrayed a degree of confusion, as Catherine, with an air of suppressed excitement, clasped her hands within her own. "I have, indeed, most delightful intelligence to impart. Apparently, father requires brother's assistance back home, and we are destined to depart within the space of a week, upon the morning of the 4th. Lydia strove to conceal her genuine sentiments, clothing her countenance in a suitable composure so as to mirror the elated expression of Catherine's face. "That sounds most agreeable," she at length managed to articulate. Catherine smiled before taking her arm and saying, "Come, take a turn about the room with me. I think of you often, and how terrible it must be for you here, my dear sweet Lydia," she continued, as the ladies circled the large floor. "You are indeed like a sister to me." Lydia nodded as her thoughts raced. Although she could identify with, and wholeheartedly be in agreeance with Catherine's sentiments in relation to the culture of the land, she could hardly ignore the crushing truth that she was now in love with a man she was soon never to see again. "You will surely give me word if you are in want or need of anything?" Catherine asked. "We are set to go to market tomorrow, for one last occasion, and it would be nothing to procure you something." "Nothing that I could think of as of yet, my Miss Catherine," she responded. Her spirits quite sank as she quitted the apartment, her knees nearly buckling beneath her. It was not for some minutes that she at last managed to exit the dwelling, each succeeding step feeling more heavily burdened as she drew near the small hut. Nathan's face shone with a bright smile, greeting her upon hearing the faint knock, but this animation was at once dismissed upon discerning her altered demeanour. "What's wrong, Litty?" he asked. Nathan stepped aside to admit her as she advanced within. Having closed the door behind them, he then turned towards her as she drew forth a letter and presented it to his hand. "This is another letter from Betsy," she said. "All right, I'll drop it off tomorrow. Got a lot to do. You seem like something bothering you. Betsy all right? You don't look too good." Yes, Betsy is fine. There's something else." "Well, what is it?" he asked, taking a step closer. "You ain't in trouble, is you?" "No, it's not that. I've just been told the most dreadful news." He pulled a seat forward for her, and she sat, whilst he leaned against a wooden counter, his arms folded. "Oh, Nathan, I have just been informed that we are set to leave on the 4th, she said. "The 4th? In September?" She shook her head again before saying, "No. August." "August? That ain't nothing but a few days. I thought y'all wasn't posed to leave fo least a month." "Yes, that was the original plan, but apparently Edward is needed back to assist Mr. Ashbourne. We are to set sail Tuesday." Nathan turned from her, placing both hands upon the counter, inclining his head. "Well, I'm sure you happy about that. Not having to teach me, no mo. I still sure wish you could stay longer." "Oh, Nathan," she stated, arising, "I do not pretend to be as happy as you think. I do so believe that I quite enjoy teaching you," she admitted. Nathan turned to see her, whose eyes seemed made of glass before his own twinkled the same. They decided to forego their customary lesson that night, preferring instead to converse late into the evening, due to the recent afforded time restraints. In the process, she lost track of time as she rested her head upon his chest, and neither had ever known such profound contentment. "You happy to go back?" he asked. Moments passed before she replied. "It possesses, I assure you, its varying degrees of both felicity and vexation. To that, I must offer both an affirmative and a negative. Yes, for I confess I find the way we are treated despicable, added to which the oppressive heat. And one must not omit, too, the incessant vexation of the mosquitoes. But also know, upon reflection, for I rather enjoy being in your company. And Betsy, of course, especially her cooking. My very own mother would not suffer horribly by taking note, I presume." After looking up at him for but a moment, and then casting her eyes down, she inquired, "Will you think of me often?" After another moment he answered with a giggle, "Whenever I see letters." Chapter 13. The sun hit his face as Nathan, startled by a sharp knock upon the door, awoke with a suddenness that nearly sent them both tumbling from his cot. It was well into daylight, a circumstance which immediately confirmed he was late to his errands, a misfortune that had never before befallen him. "Be right there," he managed to call out, though his voice was thick with sleep. Lydia, her eyes as wide as the heavens, watched his movements intently. "Hide under the bed," he whispered urgently, before leaping onto the floor. His heart thumped against his ribs, and his ankles quite trembled beneath him as he approached the door. Further impatient knocks resounded as he drew near, but his steps, no matter his exertion, felt weighted in tar. Lydia contrived to conceal herself beneath the cot precisely as he began to open the door. Never in his existence had he experienced such a profound sense of relief upon discerning that instead of one of the feared drivers, it was none other than Betsy. "Nathan, you still here?" she asked. "Yeah, I'm a-headin' out right now," he said, blocking her eyesight from entering the room. "In a rush? What you need?" You seen Litty? Her white lady want her." "No, I ain't seen her," he said, shaking his head. Betsy cocked her own to the side, scrunched her eyebrows and asked, "But she said she was comin' down here last night, and she ain't never come back to the room. You sure you ain't seen her?" By this point it was obvious that she was trying to look behind him, and yet she made no effort to hide it. Still, taking a step forward to further block her view, he said, "No, she left right after." Just as Betsy was about to further inquire, he continued, "But look, like I said, I'm in a rush and gotta get ready for work and can't be getting in no trouble. But I'ma keep an eye out for her and be sure to tell her if I see her now. Okay, I'll talk to you soon. Gotta hurry up and get ready, bye," and closed the door, paying her no heed, notwithstanding her continued attempts to speak and persistent efforts to peer beyond him. Soon after Lydia appeared from under the bed. Her level of embarrassment, although undiscovered, left her with regret. "I simply cannot believe we both fell asleep talking," Lydia said. "I ain't never done it before either, but thought that was a thing common with women since you'll like talkin' when you awake so much," he joked, yet she showed no amusement. "If men could learn to speak more than they fight when you are awake, there would be far more peace in my opinion," she replied. "Well, I ain't gonna argue which on that," he said, to which she offered a smile. "I gotta get going, Lydia, or I'ma be on the whippin' post for noon," he continued, grabbing his bridles and bits. "Yes, and I suppose I must be getting to Miss Catherine, although I'd hope she wouldn't whip me," she joked, placing her left foot in her shoe. "That lady seemed like she loved you too much to be giving you no beatin'," he laughed, opening the door. "Wait, before you go," she began, before going to the cot and grabbing the item beneath the bed. "I wanted to give you this," she concluded, handing him the learning book. "I am confident that you are already aware of the basic knowledge to get you through the volume. This way you can continue your education. Promise me that you will, Nathan." "Yes, Miss Litty. Sho will. You know I will," he replied, his eyes lighting up. After taking it, he hid the book under a set of tools in the corner. "Will I be able to see you again tonight?" she asked. "I sho hope so," he replied, holding her hand before leaving. After gathering herself, she too left, and within minutes was spotted by Betsy. "Hey, Litty, I been looking for you. You ain't come in last night. I was worried Butcher. Came by Nathan's this morning, since you said you was going there, but he said you left last night." "Ah, yes, I fell asleep by the lake. I was very tired," she said, feigning indifference. Betsy looked at her quite suspiciously before saying, Well, Nathan's show seems scared this morning. I wonder what he'd been up to. Thought you might know." "Simply hard work, I'm certain," Lydia was all too eager to reply. "Shall we return to the house?" she suggested, although it was more than a mere proposal, for she had already begun to walk past her. Betsy smiled as she joined her, saying, "Oh, I meant to tell you your white lady want to talk to you." "Betsy, I've told you 1,000 times her name is Miss Catherine. I don't know why you insist on referring to her in such a manner." "I don't know. I suppose 'cause it's easier," she replied. "Oh, there she go right there," she continued, pointing toward the head of the avenue. Both Catherine and Edward began to get in the buggy as Lydia quickened her steps, leaving Betsy behind. "Miss Catherine, Mr. Edward," she greeted them upon arrival. "My apologies. I just received news, Miss Catherine, that you were in need of my presence." "Ah, yes, my dear sweet Lydia. I would inquire about your needs once again. Are you sure that you should require nothing for travel?" "We are off to Hampton for our last trip, but we'll be back this evening." "A chamber pot, if you would be so kind," she quickly said. Using the same facilities as the others during the previous voyage had left her traumatized. "Yes." Catherine nodded. "You have just reminded me that I too shall be in need of the same," she whispered in Lydia's ear, before riding off with Edward. Later that evening, as she washed her plate, Lydia stated plainly, "Dear Betsy, I am convinced you would be deemed the finest cook in all England should you ever favour us with a visit." Betsy smiled, leaning back against the wall before replying, "Yeah, Mama used to teach us foe she passed. Her daddy used to talk about them freeing us even foe they died. Lord know that ain't gon' happen." Lydia leaned in. "So am I to understand there are no free blacks here?" Betsy leaned away, looking unbelievably before saying, "Show ain't none in the south. Least not that I know. I hear they up north." "Up north? Where?" "I don't know, but from what I hear on up in Pennsylvania, then get to this place called Canada, and you'll be good, though I ain't posed to know that. I don't know if it's true or not. Betsy, may I ask you something?" "Yeah, you can ask me all you want, Litty." Lydia sat up and said, "Don't you want to be free?" "You mean like you, Litty?" She looked down for a moment, replying, "I am not, I assure you, entirely at liberty as yet. It is true, I may still attend to my daily employments, and even partake of certain amusements. Yet, I remain bound to complete my term of service, under the roof of the Ashbourne household. How long till you free then?" "But 4.5 years. Then I may go pursue my own endeavours, or I may choose to continue my work and advancement within the household, should I remain in good standings." Betsy looked away in thought for a moment, before looking back to comment, "I been thinking about being free, Miss Litty. I think about it just about every day. At first I tried to ignore it like the older ones do and tell me to, but I can't lie, Miss Litty. The mo' I get to being round you, the mo' I think about what it'll be like if I ain't have to worry about getting up and cleaning after nobody and getting talked to any kind of way. Or worry about getting whipped if I do the wrong thing the wrong way, or say the wrong thing the wrong way, or... I do say yes, Miss Litty, I think about being free all the time, getting free and staying free. Me and my sister..." "Where would you go?" "Same as I told you, Bifu. Own up to Canada." Just then, the women heard men yelling outside. The sound came from the entrance of the plantation and was fast approaching. "Massa, please!" cried Nathan. Scarcely had Lydia and Betsy gained the open air, than they beheld him sink to the earth from the force of another cruel blow. 2 of the overseers forthwith began to escort him, administering blows as they proceeded, ere a third, with a menacing gesture, exclaimed, "Get her too!" pointing at Betsy, upon whom a sudden faintness immediately stole, threatening a complete swoon. 2 additional drivers hastened to where they stood, seizing Betsy by both arms. But with an unnatural strength she resisted, maintaining a desperate hold upon Lydia's wrist, who, in turn, exerted her own strength to retain her. They continued their desperate hold upon one another, until a third overseer made his appearance, who with superior force succeeded in separating them both, casting Lydia roughly backwards upon the earth with a harsh declaration. "You better stay the hell back. Just 'cause you ain't from here don't mean you still ain't a Negro." His yells froze her in place as she lay there, on the ground, both shocked and horrified. She watched her friends be taken away, able to do nothing, as Betsy kicked and screamed. Once she and Nathan were together, they marched them across the plantation. Chapter 14. Once the overseers left, Lydia arose. The other slaves acted as if nothing was happening, or had occurred. Once her personal disciplinarian had left, she began walking back to the cabin, but her soul could not achieve it, and she fell to the ground. The surrounding company forthwith offered their assistance, once the drivers were quite beyond view. It was as though her faculties of motion and reflection were utterly suspended, nor could she discern her situation until the lapse of an hour or thereabouts, when her spirit was at length capable of rising above the present suffering, so as to contrive a scheme. It was just past midnight, and Lydia arose from the cot. Sweat beaded from her brow as her dry eyes remained open, unable to receive the sweet respite of slumber. She put on her shoes and headed toward the door as silently as she could. After slightly opening it and peeking out, upon seeing no one else, Lydia crept off into the darkness. She had been told Nathan and Betsy were being held on the other end of the plantation near the weaving room. The only illumination she perceived was a dim light emanating from Catherine's room, high upstairs in the main house, where she was known to read late into the night. She earnestly hoped that she, nor anyone else, espied her as she cautiously walked amongst the slave quarters and other such areas. Some minutes later, Lydia arrived near the weaving room, where she crouched behind an elderberry bush. And just as she had been informed by one of the slaves there, Nathan was indeed present. Taking a few steps closer, she could discern that his hands and feet were bound to two separate posts, one on each side, in a position of forced stretch. She cast a swift glance to her left and right before scurrying over through the dirt. His head was bowed low and remained so, even upon her close approach. Lydia stumbled back, having to catch herself from falling, when she at last saw his countenance. Not only his eyes, but his entire face was grievously swollen, and his lips appeared as large as she had ever witnessed. Blood ran freely from his nose as he struggled for breath, his chest elevating and lowering painfully. Recovering her composure, she walked forward once more, placing a hand upon his chest, causing him to start and emit a low grunt, startling her greatly in turn. "Wait," Nathan proclaimed, causing Lydia to gasp as he struggled to get one of his eyes open to see. "Please no more, massa," he continued, bloody tears falling from them. "Nathan, Nathan," she interrupted. "It's me," she whispered, replacing her hand. "What?" he asked, bewildered. "Litty?" "Yes, Nathan," she assured him, grabbing and holding his face in her hand. "I am here," she confirmed, her hands now red, but she cared little. "Litty, what you doing here? The overseer come round about every hour. They see you, they gone—" "I don't care," she said, holding his face tighter. "Oh?" he let out, endeavouring to conceal the volume of his exclamation. "Oh, I apologize," she responded, snatching her hands away. Although she had heard of it from older British blacks, Lydia had never seen such brutality or the aftermath. This was a man that, although able to recognize his face seemed far more unfamiliar. Despite this, she could still notice the upward curl on the right side of his lips begin to form. "Damn, it ain't never hurt this much to smile," he said. "Sure feel good to hear you. Now if only I could see you too." She could not understand how even at a time like this, he could bring humour. "Nathan, who did this to you?" "Wasn't nobody but the drivers," he replied. "'Pose I can't blame nobody but myself. When I done came to drop off Esther letter, the massa had just got home. Anyway, he and one of the drivers asked me what I was doing there and all this and that. I say I'm just driving through. Turn out they was waiting for me 'bout 30 minutes fo then. Done found the letters I'd been dropping off, and that ain't the worst part. Beat that girl po's sister so bad she done told them. Anyway, they grabbed me up, then went through my coach and started looking and, well, soon enough, they done found the letter and took me. Yeah, they wanted to go on and hang me there till the massa say give 'em on back to Massa Monroe and let him deal with me and they was gon' deal with Esther." "What happened to Betsy?" He seemed to look down for a moment before replying. "I'd hate to think 'bout it now they know she know how to read and write. Heard her hollin' earlier. Lucky they still don't know you been teachin' me. Where is she?" "After they done beat her, they took her round to that shed over yonder by the corn crib. I ain't never heard no woman scream like that, Litty." She looked over about 100 yards away to the locked shed before her glassy eyes finally erupted. "But what? What will become of you both?" She turned back to him and asked. "Will they allow you to heal before returning to work?" Nathan endeavoured to suppress the unexpected chuckle which occasioned a sharp pang in his ribs, ere his face resumed its former tone. "They already told me they was gone send me down to Florida, where I'll die a beat-up old man. Massa say he can get least $700 for me." "I've never heard of such a despicable thing. Surely you must be able to persuade Mr. Monroe through conversation." "I sure wish I could do that. But if I could, I pose I be a free man." "And what shall come of Betsy? Will she be allowed to stay?" He shook his head before replying. "Now that she know how to read, Litty, I reckon they'll whip her, beat on her some mo', and send her down to Georgia. She'll probably work in the fields there." "She'll be even further from her sister," Lydia gasped. "Yeah, but better than what they could do." "Nathan," she began, "it is not possible to fully express my regret. Had I known this were to occur, I would have never agreed to travel here." "Then I would have never met you," he said. "Pretty much the only thing I've been thinking about to keep my mind off the pain." She embraced him, lightly lying her head on his chest. "They say they gon' sell me the day you'll leave," he stated. "Probably so your lady ain't got to see all the commotion, I reckon. Probably Betsy too." "I cannot permit it," she declared, casting her eyes upwards and gently shaking her head, ere she receded a single pace and rested her hands upon his shoulders. "Is there any way," she began. "I presume I'm asking if there is any way that I can help?" Nathan drew back before joking. "Not less you can fly us up north." But Lydia was not. "I can come back tomorrow night. Maybe then I—" No, he interrupted, once fully apprehending the gravity of her intent. "They'll have you strung up right next to me, and I just can't see me making it through that, Litty. But what if—" She was instantly rendered immobile, as Nathan could scarcely see clearly enough as to the disturbance's source. A chilling tremor passed through Lydia's frame as she stood utterly still, her gaze, unmoving save for her pupils, directed towards the quarter whence the sound arose. She was assailed by a sensation of an imminent end, until she perceived, with a sudden easing of dread, the glistening eyes of an opossum emerge from the concealing foliage. "Just an animal," she said, exhaling. Nathan shook his head. "Now, see, Litty, you need to go back fo the overseer come back round." But before he could finish, they both heard footsteps approaching. After her lips pecked Nathan's cheek, she slipped off into the darkness. She had only kissed another once, and it had been Edward when they were both children. It was for a game where if the adults were to discover the existence, then they would have been, well, that is not of importance. "Boy, who you talking to?" the man said. Lydia, just managing to escape unseen, turned around to view their interaction. "Nobody, sir," Nathan answered. "Just myself." The overseer looked him up and down before saying, "Yeah, you crazy enough to talk to yourself, boy? I was you, I'd keep quiet lest you want me to help you." To which Nathan nodded, and the man left. Lydia followed suit, once she was fully assured of his departure. Resuming the familiar path she had trod before, and almost running, she soon gained Betsy's cabin. After satisfying herself that no curious eyes observed her movements, she entered within, drawing the door quietly to, resolved to make not the least sound. With a faint click it secured itself, and she turned about in the dim twilight of the night. Yet even that insufficient illumination proved enough to reveal she was not the sole occupant. The dark silhouette of a man, of stature considerably taller than her own, presented itself in the narrow space between her and where she slept. "Lydia," he said, with a voice she knew too well. After he took a step forward, her conclusions were affirmed. "Where were you?" Edward asked. I was merely out for a walk. Lydia, I have not known dishonesty as a trait synonymous with your character, and certainly do not intend to," he interrupted. "I have been waiting for nearly an hour." Edward took a few more steps toward her. "Where were you?" he repeated. "I am telling the truth. Am I no longer afforded that luxury?" "Oh, and where did you walk to, my dear?" he asked, circling her, his hands behind his back. "It must have been quite the voyage." "No, only around the grounds, Mr. Edward." "You lie in my face and endanger our stature, when my sister gave you the opportunity to experience a world in which you would have never." "Mr. Edward?" she pleaded. "I don't understand. Where were you?" He repeated. "Mr. Edward, I simply wanted to take a walk to rid myself of the heat." "Ah, the heat. And whereabouts did these travels lead you, dear Lydia?" "Only around the grounds, sir. It is not uncommon to walk—" "No, I'd hardly expect you to remain in the same location for the total duration of our trip, but dare I say, many may regard it slightly strange and unusual for your travel in the small hours of the night as you have recently displayed." "Recently displayed?" "Yes. Did you visit the Negro and his wench housed in captivity on the grounds?" he asked, finally. Despite her utmost efforts, her countenance betrayed her astonishment, yet she persisted nevertheless. "Mr. Ashbourne!" she exclaimed. "Who do you refer to?" Edward sneered, his irritability increasing, before pressing. "I repeat, dare say I, did you visit the Negroes who are now chained?" "Sir, I do not pretend to be aware of—" "You dare mock me?" he asked, approaching yet again. "Sir Edward, I dare not. Did you see the Negro mail driver or not?" Ere she could utter another word, he observed. "Yes. I was quite astonished to learn that you afforded protection to his negress earlier this day, before our arrival, in a slight contention, when one of the labourers endeavoured to secure them." "Yes," Lydia ultimately admitted. "That worker was my friend, whom both you and I know quite well, and I do consider Betsy the same, as that negress, as you refer to her being, assists in nearly everything I do. And about her Negro? It seems that the feelings he has portrayed does indeed align with your own. I do not pretend to be aware of your alludings," she said. "Nathan," he said sternly. Everything seemed to become still. "I believe his name is." Her eyes lowered to the floor before he continued. "Our driver." "And what of him?" she asked. "And what of him? My dear Lydia, do not pretend to ignore your standing with his. At first I thought a joke, but now I see the rumours to be true, and passing judgment on the tenderness of your own eyes when he appears confirms my suspicions. Do you proclaim to be unaware of these accusations? Much more remain so unknowingly ignorant to the ramblings of all that reside here then to assume those same mentions would not enter the ears of her owners. Owners? Yes, owners, he repeated. I see the bracelet you now adorn, just as I have before. Tell me with the utmost sincerity that your Negro had not made it for you, out of love. She looked down at the gift and then to him. Yes. She nodded. Edward looked down at her, his gaze a mark of profound indignation. Just as I suspected. It is as if you adopted him, he continued. Her astonishment was striking at his statement. You represent us, not just our family, but Britain itself. The fact that you've chosen to lie with rats when you could have been could have been what? She could hold her silence no longer. Lie with rats? Why? Because he is labelled a slave and you a noble, and he from America and we from Britain? Labels, she said. Only labels. He is a far more estimable man than any to whom you have hitherto thought proper to introduce me. Edward scowled, yet she continued. He has strength. He has character. He has every single and coupled thing that I would want in a man, and you seek to push him away? Why? I plead for the reason's explanation. Because he is not you? The statement alone visibly discomposed him quite severely. This was not a deterrent, for she then ended. I believe it is jealousy. His frown could have lowered the heavens. Lydia clutched her face, her knee, defensively raised up at him as she lay. His fists clutched and breath bellowed before saying, You'd be careful, girl. A most agreeable understanding has always subsisted between us, and I have forever held you of the utmost in regard. But if you test my patience again, it surely shall be the last time. Wiping the crimson stain from her lip, she replied, I never harboured a wish to quit my mother's side. Yet you, she continued as she slowly regained her feet, saw fit to accept my acquaintance. Despite the specifics of our circumstance, the circumstance remains the same. My sister, your keeper, chose to bring you along. You will not continue to embarrass not only this family, but our country, he yelled, almost seeming to shake the wooden walls. He walked around her, reaching the door before turning around and ordering, You will remain here until told otherwise, he said, opening the door and beginning to leave. Lydia looked away for a moment. Her eyes felt light and spirit shallow. I remember a day, Mr. Edward, she began, looking back up to him. She repaired to her cot, whereupon she seated herself, her hands composedly clasped, whilst Edward, having turned about, remained fixed in the doorway. It seemed, to my recollection, as a dream. Your 5th or 6th birthday, if my memory serves me rightly. Perhaps you recall it also, though indeed you would not. Perchance it was a mere fabrication of sleep, and no such boy ever existed. A boy on whose birthday, as I lay in the fields where I remember skipping rope one afternoon, this being but minutes after we were bidden to join the young noble child in his play, for it was his day of birth. And how dearly I loved that boy, appreciating him for treating me not as a mere girl in his world. I recall leaving him to join my companions and feeling a distinct void in his absence. Then a cry reached our ears, a sound so piercing I imagined it must proceed from a grown man. Yet, as the screams continued, it resembled, with increasing certainty, the voice of the boy I knew. So we ran, and ran, and ran, until at last we gained the spot, and there I beheld a larger boy striking that smaller one with blows so severe, so hellacious upon the head, that I found myself compelled to act. I recall seizing a stick and bringing it with all my might across that brutish creature's head, laying him senseless upon the ground. I remember setting the stick aside, then crouching and holding the boy, who was near my own age, as if he were my very brother. and he, in turn, held me with equal affection. His gaze, as he looked upon me, was as one who had seen an angel. And from that day, our paths have been inextricably linked. Even when that boy and I found ourselves in the garden on his birthday, his companions sought him, but he would not answer their calls. Instead, he confessed his desire for my presence, embracing me for what seemed minutes on end, declaring his wish that I were truly his own. I also remember, with striking clarity, when that boy took my hand, holding it fast within his own, until we arrived back at the manor where all the adults and his friends awaited, and I remember well the countenances they bore upon beholding us. I remember precisely what your mother said when you led me past them all and onto the steps leading to the assembled company. Do you? Before Edward could answer, she did him the service. Let go of that Negro's hand, your mother said before running up and separating us. Although some may look appealing, you must never forget they are dirty and will always be beneath you. Edward's mouth stood agape as his eyes reached the floor before turning and leaving. Lydia dropped to her knees and sobbed, yet only the walls knew her cries. Chapter 15. The next morning, Catherine strolled out of the dining room, where she, Edward, and the Munros had just been seated. Hurrying down the winding stairwell and past a few house slaves, she reached the entrance before arriving outdoors. She waited at the entrance of the house after sending a slave to fetch Lydia. Minutes later she arrived, approaching Catherine, who did the same, yet something was amiss. Lydia, dear, it is morning, she called. We are having breakfast, and I know how you love buttered rolls. Would you like? My word, Catherine exclaimed, covering her open mouth with her gloved hands, fixating ever so intently on Lydia, who grew closer. Who did such a thing? She asked. Lydia looked away, ashamed. Lydia, she pursued, pulling her face back toward her, I demand to know the culprit. Mr. Edward, your brother, she revealed, looking past her at the home. Catherine's eyes grew and her lips quivered as she retracted her hands. What do you mean, my bro? Yes, Miss Catherine, it was he, she interrupted, and their eyes met, piercing into each other in that singular moment. This couldn't be, she began, shaking her head. Edward would never raise her. But the anger in Lydia's eyes prevented further utterance. Catherine's hands trembled, unaccustomed as she was to such discomposure, and without further delay, she turned abruptly, storming out of the door and back towards the main house. That sister of yours sure seems smart, Mr. Munro said, taking a sip of sweet tea. The slaves waited and watched over the three whites who conversed until the door opened and everyone looked toward the woman storming in, but before anyone could say a word. Edward? Catherine inquired, her voice betraying more command than solicitation. May I beg the favour of a very brief moment with you in the hallway? A subtle, inquisitive glance passed between the husband and wife, as Edward, perceiving the peculiar urgency in his sister's tone, forthwith excused himself, and no sooner had he done so than they stood alone. Catherine, what is the meaning of the tell me, dear brother, that it is not, in any wise, true that you have presumed to mistreat our dearest sweet Lydia? But for a moment he cast a glance behind them, and taking her arm to lead her farther down the passage, he confessed in a low whisper, I chanced to observe her stealing from her quarters yesternight. I am quite persuaded her purpose was to visit those negroes in the slave quarters. Which negroes? She asked. Having drawn her to a corner where he was quite assured they were beyond the hearing of the Munros, he answered. The coachman and the housemaid, the very same whose company she so often prefers. Seeing that his sister was still unsure, he clarified. The Negro man who often takes us into town and the dark maid lacking in hair. And what vexes you so regarding her seeing them? Does she not sleep beside one while being quite close friends with the other? The great peril, sister, is this. Were she to be discovered in such a venture, she would face a punishment from which we should be utterly powerless to deliver her from. You must remember, this is not Kent. Our purpose here is for the sake of commerce, and that alone. That is no excuse to strike her. A mere word would have been sufficient. What is the true meaning of this? He looked away and out the window, saying nothing. Edward, she said, leaning in, jealousy is not worthy of a noble man. She is not your ward, brother. Her presence here is upon my invitation, and as such, I alone shall bear the responsibility for her conduct. I would ask that you refrain from ever touching her again. Yes, I shall demand it. She seems to have forgotten her place. Her place is with me, not under the weight of your hand. You will apologize. I must insist on it. It is the only gentlemanly thing to do. In the course of that afternoon, as Lydia was reclining upon her bed, she was greatly startled to see her chamber door pushed open without ceremony. It was Mr. Edward who entered, causing her to start up at once, instinctively drawing her knees to her chest in a posture of no little alarm. "Lydia," he said, closing the door behind him and approaching. "Are you still upset with me?" he asked, to which she said nothing. "Of course you are," he surmised. "How could you not be?" Edward paced the room before stopping and saying, "The reason for my visit should be of no surprise, Miss Lydia. I would like to not only apologize, but also remind you that we are to leave in the morning. I sincerely hope that I may once again regain your trust." With a brief inclination of his head, Mr. Edward then stood perfectly still, regarding her with a patient and expectant air. As she offered no immediate reply, he at last inquired, "My dearest Lydia, have you no desire for discourse?" After a moment she lifted her head, only to render 2 words. "Yes, massa," she replied, before lying back down, turning away from him and facing the wall. A visible change overcame Mr. Edward's countenance. He stood for a moment quite speechless, as if entirely robbed of his composure. Then, turning abruptly on his heel, he quit the room, shutting the door with such a want of temper that the very frame seemed to shudder, only serving to further agitate the occupant. It was not until many hours later, when the sun had given way to the moon and she had returned from the evening meal, that she at last regained the solitude of her chamber. Yet the room was to afford her no true repose, for the disquiet of her mind could not be soothed. The faces of Nathan and of Betsy rose perpetually before her, occupying her thoughts to the exclusion of all else. Chapter 16. Some hours later, true to her promise to Nathan, Lydia resolved to defy Mr. Edward's injunction, persuaded as she was that no other opportunity should present itself. She could not suffer the notion that her own conduct had precipitated such turmoil for 2 souls she considered her dearest friends. The weight of this culpability was too great to bear, and so, stealing from her room once more, she kept to the shadows to escape any lingering light and crept through the grounds of the plantation. The chirping of crickets and the soft fall of her own feet were the only sounds to disturb the stillness, until, upon rounding the dairy house, she stopped short, her heart seizing in her breast. A large figure of a man advanced towards her, one of the overseers she knew at once, and such a wave of faintness washed over her that she feared she might again falter. She pressed herself against the wall of the structure, taking every care that the movement should make no sound, and with a tremor of fear slowly lowered herself into the concealment of the tall grasses that bordered it. Quiet as though she had been, the faint rustle of her movement gave the man pause. His hand went at once to the rifle at his shoulder as he came to a halt, surveying the darkness about him. Lydia scarce dared to breathe, her gaze fixed upon him with a terrible intensity. After the near death of her patients, his eyes passed over her hiding place. Apparently satisfied, he resumed his patrol and continued on his way. Only when he had gone did she become sensible of an ache in her hands, and looking down, discovered she had been clutching the fabric of her dress with such force that her knuckles were quite white. For a moment she questioned whether to continue on what now seemed a fool's errand, or to retreat to the safety of her chamber. Yet their memory would not grant her cause to abandon, so she arose from the grass and pressed onward. The night air was possessed of a biting chill, and Nathan shivered, though his bonds gave him no means of seeking warmth. An ache had settled deep in his joints, and his muscles protested with a soreness beyond any he had known. It was then he heard the soft sound of footsteps. As the moon shone more brightly than it had on the eve before, coupled with the improvement of his sight, he had only to lift his gaze to know at once the identity of the figure approaching. "Girl, what is you doing here?" "We are set to leave in the morn. I told you that I would come back. Surely there is something that I can do to free you." Perceiving he could not dissuade her, he replied, "Not less you got something I can cut these ropes with. I cannot go into the main house undetected. And what of your workshop, sir? Would that not serve the purpose?" Nathan thought for a moment. "Well, I got a hatchet in there, but I don't want you wandering all around this late. If something happened to you, Litty, I wouldn't care too much about nothing else. I am sensible of your kind sentiments, I assure you, but I must insist. Now, I urge you to tell me, shall you provide the key, or must I be compelled to seek a most improper entrance by way of the window?" "Well, when they took me, they took the key, so I'm sure they done locked it back up. I got a spare one under the rock by the tree on the side, but like I said, I sure wish you just go back." "And Betsy?" she interrupted. "How shall we free her? I believe you asserted she has been confined to that small outbuilding which stands beside the corn crib." "Yeah, she over there right on. We go need something to break the lock. Now, if you can get in my shed and get that hatchet hanging on the wall, it's a pry bar sitting cross from it. But you better hurry. Ain't seen the overseer in a while, and he due back in a bit." Allowing for no hesitation, she made her way with all possible dispatch to his building. Having retrieved the key from its place of concealment, she gained entry, easily procured the necessary tools, and at once began her return. "I ain't never been so happy to see somebody in my life. Driver just left," he said when she arrived. "As good fortune would have it," she said, offering a small, determined smile. "My time in your society has not been entirely misspent, for I am well acquainted with the tools you named. Now, pray tell me, where are we to begin?" "First grab that," he said, pointing at the hatchet. Lydia picked up the sharp and heavy tool. "Now," he continued, "I suppose we'll start with the legs. Go on and cut the rope on the right one, but cut closer to the pole," he ended, shaking his foot in that direction. She looked at the rope, his foot, the pole, and then back to him, and repeated these glances numerous times until finally Nathan asked, "Litty, what's wrong?" "I'm not entirely comfortable with my proficiency in this task," she replied. "It seems the risk may prove exceedingly greater than the reward." "Ain't nothing to it, Litty. Now go on. I trust you now." After a deep breath and nod, she raised the hatchet high above her head. "Lord help me," Nathan murmured. Knowing if the swing was unsuccessful, not only would he have one less foot, but would also be likely to receive even more punishment when discovered, for he would surely scream. Lydia, although not as religious, murmured a similar sentiment before committing to the act. The hatchet did indeed come down with enough force to break bone, and luckily did not, splitting the rope in two. The relief they both felt at this first success is scarcely to be described. Emboldened by it, Lydia applied herself to the second leg. It was not long after that he stood before her, entirely free before collapsing. Nonetheless, with Lydia offering her arm for support, he was at last able to rise. After taking a moment to recover his bearing, they set off at once towards the place where Betsy was confined. "We ain't got much time left. Once overseer see I done left, it's gon' be hell to pay." "Then it's best we should make haste." Nathan took up the pry-bar and endeavoured to force the lock, but his long confinement had so diminished his strength that his efforts were of little avail. Seeing him falter, Lydia set down the hatchet she carried and added her own strength to his. For a moment their combined exertions seemed to promise little success, when suddenly the lock gave way entirely. The force of it sent them both stumbling backwards to the ground, while the pry-bar was flung from their hands and the shattered remnants of the lock scattered about them. The clamour was far greater than either had anticipated, and they exchanged a look of shared concern, their hearts pounding as they listened for any sign of alarm. Though they could now discern some stirring from within the building, their more immediate terror were those possibly amongst them. When several moments passed and no alarm was raised, they allowed themselves to breathe once more. Nathan rose and, pushing open the now unfastened door, saw at once the figure of Betsy within. The sight that met Lydia's eyes was of such an appalling nature that she stopped short, her constitution entirely overcome. A wave of violent sickness seized her, and she turned away, stifling the sounds of her distress as best she could. Before them, Betsy was discovered in a state of degradation that defied all words. Her countenance was so cruelly bruised and disfigured as to be almost beyond recognition, and it was plain to see that she'd been subjected to the most unspeakable brutalities. Shaking himself from his own stupor of horror, Nathan rushed to her side. With his knife, he hastily severed the ropes that bound her, and gathering the poor girl into his arms, laid her gently upon the floor. Both he and Lydia then bent over their friend, but she seemed lost to the world, giving no sign that she was sensible of their presence or of her new-found liberty. "It ain't looking too good," he whispered. "But she's still living." "We can't leave her here," Lydia said. "Sho can't," he agreed. Her breathing was but a faint and shallow affair, and a low moan of pain was drawn from her as they bore her from the chamber with all the stealth and strength that they could muster. "All right," Nathan began, after they delicately laid her in the grass. "I'll take her out and we'll head up north. It's best you get back." "You are far too injured to carry her on your own," Lydia said. "Please allow me to assist you for at least a mile. I shall not lose my way. The path is quite familiar to me." He shook his head. "No, Litty. Ain't gon' be for long they know we gone then. You ain't gon' be able to sneak back in." "Then at least to the road," she insisted. Again, any disagreement would be futile. The party of three proceeded towards the line of trees that formed the boundary of the plantation. They were but a stone's throw from the road when Betsy was seized by a fit of coughing. In the profound quiet of the evening, the sound was so sharp and arresting that it seemed to echo about them, forcing them all to a sudden, fearful halt. "Who the hell is that?" a voice in the distance demanded. Their fears had come to fruition as the footsteps quickly approached. Nathan and Lydia quickly laid their friend down as gently as they could, before jumping into the nearby brush and hiding within. Soon they saw the overseer, rifle at the ready, walk toward them. His head remained on a swivel, looking near and far for the sound that had just eluded him. "I know I heard something," he murmured, now less than 2 feet from Betsy's foot. Nathan gripped the hatchet, posturing himself to use it while Lydia's heart jumped. For a moment the man stood quite still, his gaze sweeping over the immediate vicinity. He then commenced a slow, deliberate patrol of the area, his steps taking him back and forth until he passed so near to Betsy's head that her companions scarce dared to breathe. He grunted before finally turning around and walking away. Once out of sight, Lydia inhaled sharply, unaware she had been holding her breath. "We gotta get going, Litty," Nathan whispered, snapping her out of the trance. She nodded, handing him the pry bar. "I sure wish it wasn't like this," he said. "It would be the greatest delight that we would meet again," she replied. "Perhaps when you arrive in the north you may write me? Where should you go?" He thought for a moment before saying, "They say ain't no slaves in Canada." "Then both you and Betsy will write me then?" "Just address it to the Ashbourne Estates in Kent." "Sure will. Maybe even visit once we get settled." He smiled. They shared an embrace before Lydia bent over to kiss Betsy on the forehead. Voices began to yell out near the plantation. At the sound of the shouts, they sprang apart at once, their heads turning as one towards the source of the commotion. "We gotta go, Litty," he said, picking up Betsy and hoisting her on his shoulder. "I'll show Miss you." "As will I," Lydia responded, tears in her eyes, and she watched the two disappear into the night. The sound of barking, followed by a rising clamour of voices, spurred her to a desperate haste. Forsaking the direct path, she chose a more circuitous route back to the Betsy's shed, keeping to the shadows in the hope of escaping the notice of the commotion. It was with a sense of profound and almost incredulous relief that she at last reached the door and slipped inside. Throwing herself upon the cot, she pretended to sleep, for she could now hear the sounds of the other inhabitants of the quarters being roused from their beds. "Runaways! We've got runaways!" someone outside yelled. Seconds later, 2 slave drivers burst in with their lamps. Lydia remained motionless, facing the wall. "This one belonged to the redcoats," one said. They briefly looked around before exiting, slamming the door behind them. Chapter 17. Lydia was roused by the warmth of the morning sun as its light streamed through the gaps in the rough-hewn walls. For but a second she lay in the hazy state between sleeping and waking, until the memory of the night's desperate events returned to her with such a sudden force that she sat bolt upright. Though she could not have slept above 2 hours, she felt none of the expected fatigue. In its place, a nervous energy animated her frame, and her heart beat with a quickness that forbade any further thought of rest. Having quickly dressed and gathered her few belongings, she made her way to the head of the avenue to await her companions. The grounds were possessed of a stillness that struck her as being entirely at odds with the turmoil of the preceding hours. She had not been waiting long before she discerned the figures of Catherine and Edward walking towards her. Just as they were to set off, Catherine leaned over to Lydia and asked, "Did you hear?" Lydia shook her head, feigning ignorance, asking, "Is something wrong, Miss Catherine?" "Apparently," she began, leaning in quite closer, "2 slaves escaped last night. That's why Mr. Monroe isn't here to see us off. He's been away since morning." "They haven't caught them?" "No, I do not believe so." Lydia had never found it so difficult to contain her elation. "You seem to be of high spirits," Catherine said. "Who can blame you? I surely am glad to escape this place as well." Lydia nodded. "Yes, Miss Catherine. I look forward to the journey." Soon they travelled down the narrow dirt road leading to the docks, taking in the countryside one last time. Upon their arrival at the docks, the carriage drew to a halt. Mr. Edward descended to assist the ladies, performing this duty with a formal correctness, though his gaze studiously avoided meeting Lydia's. He then turned his attention to the matter of their luggage. Their party made its way towards the ship, the Eagle, a vessel of respectable, though not enormous size, and began their ascent up the gangway. Mr. Edward led the way, with Catherine and Lydia following arm in arm, but a few steps behind him. They had nearly reached the deck when Catherine gave a sudden, sharp gasp, her hand flying to her mouth. She stopped so abruptly in her path that Lydia, whose arm was linked securely in hers, was pulled back with no little force. "Miss Catherine, what is the matter?" she asked, before looking at what seemed to cause occasion for such an outburst. Yet when she did, Lydia collapsed onto the wooden planks, fainting as she slipped away from Catherine's hold. Mr. Edward, whose attention had been near entirely engaged by the study of a map, at last raised his head to discover his sister standing above Lydia, who had sunk to the deck in what appeared to be a fit of terrible agony. Her whole frame racked with sobs that soaked the bodice of her dress. In the next moment, a cry of such piercing anguish tore from Lydia's throat that it seemed to silence all who were present. Startled, Mr. Edward's gaze immediately followed the direction of hers, seeking with an urgent alarm to comprehend the source of such profound despair. His gaze swept the area near the docks, settling upon a great live oak, larger than any he had ever seen. He followed the line of its massive trunk upwards, his eyes tracing the path to the branches, where his attention was suddenly arrested. From two of them, stark against the morning sky, hung 2 lengths of rope, with bodies hanging from the end, and immediately realized the reason for Lydia's outcry. "Why?" she continued to scream, before feeling Edward's arms cover and lift her. Despite her efforts to be released, he was too strong, and she trembled with despair as his sleeves became damp with the evidence of this emotion. "Lydia," he whispered, still holding tightly, "I understand that this moment must be overwhelming for you, but you must at all costs keep your composure." His eyes darted from side to side at the growing number of whites gathering to stare at them both, including at what had caused the uproar. "They were discovered in the early hours of this morning," he continued, his voice low and urgent as he steadied her trembling frame. "The initial judgment was merely to have them whipped and sold away. But then this was found." He pressed a small volume into her hands. It was concealed in the blacksmith's workshop. They knew it at once for the very book procured by Miss Catherine for yourself, as Miss Munro stood in accompaniment during the purchase, and upon its discovery, Mr. Munro altered his decree. I swore to them that you could never have parted with it willingly, that the Negro must have stolen it from you. It was your good fortune that they accepted my account of the matter," he concluded, gently raising her to her feet. The violence of her grief subsided into a dreadful quietude. Lydia spoke no more, save for a low, incoherent mumbling, as she kept her eyes resolutely fixed upon the deck, unable to bear looking up to witness that dreadful spectacle a second time. Mr. Edward assisted her up the gangway, while a pale and silent Catherine followed close behind. None marked the gifted seashell, as it slipped from a fold in Lydia's handbag, striking the wooden ramp once, before tumbling over the edge and vanishing forever into the dark water below.